clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Present.
Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Mail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
There are no additional agenda items this evening. I'll provide a quick agenda scheduling update on upcoming items of interest. Next Monday, October 29th, we have scheduled the first reading ordinance adjusting salary and compensation of the council. We have a resolution extending the food truck pilot program and expanding the hours and days of the program, and a resolution dissolving the Montgomery College Neighborhood Advisory Committee. Tuesday, the 13th of November, and that's because Veterans Day is on Monday, the 12th. We have a public hearing on the MOU between the city and State Highway Administration regarding 410. And we have a work session discussion of proposed revisions to the Code, Chapter 6.16, Landlord-Tenant Relations. Monday, November 19th, we have 3 presentations scheduled. Presentation of the fiscal year 2012 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, presentation from the actuary for the police pension plan, and a discussion of the Safe Grow Zone initiative. That's been postponed a couple times, but that's firmly on the 19th. And just a reminder that Monday, November 26th, the council will not be meeting. So that's just a quick update on upcoming agenda items. I have no items for the record. What I'd like to now do is go to public comment, and that is any comments on anything that's not on our agenda this evening. So this is not the public hearings on either New Hampshire Gardens or the residency advice and consent proposals, but anything else. Mr. Lovelace.
Yep, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your official peace delegate. I wanted to tell you again, 15 more days and counting before, remember, November, before it's time to vote. And it's going to be a very important vote this year. It doesn't seem that long when it was 60 or 70 days ago, and 90 days ago. Think back, it doesn't seem that long, does it? Time is going by fast. I hope you're all out there registered to vote. And I hope I see a lot of you down there at the polls when I'm down there. And I hope to see everybody out there voting, because that's our American duty, is to vote and to be proud of our vote. A lot of people died for our right to vote, and the best way to show our respect for those people who died for our right to vote is to get out there and use our right to vote and vote. Another thing I want to bring up again is when I come in that door, there's a big hump, like a speed bump. I call it the bone buster because it hurts real bad on my back when we go over that. And I'd like to ask the city if they're ever going to fix that. And another thing I think the city should do is, if it's possible, is to pass an ordinance allowing all businesses in the Tacoma Park area to do away with thresholds, or at least minimize them as much as possible, so the people in wheelchairs and people in walkers can go over those things without getting hurt. I wonder if there's an ADA regulation on that. There should be. For God's sakes, that thing hurts. It's like we're going over, it outdoes the Maple Avenue speed bump, for God's sakes, every time we go over that thing. And I just hope that, that we can fix that, because I'm thinking about not just my back, because I broke my back several times from granulomatosis. I've broken my back. And I just want to think about other people who have had fractures and who have arthritis, who have other serious conditions that are afflicting their backs and their bones. People with osteoporosis can run a problem with a fracture going over that thing. And I'd like to ask the city, can they please fix that bone buster as we come in the door? And also, if we can we pass an ordinance making it a requirement for every business in the city to do away with those big humps as they enter their businesses, so that people don't hurt themselves. I'd like to see that passed, really. That would be great, to pass a resolution to make that illegal to have those really high bumps in our city. And if we can do it, other people in our city, we could make the ADA regulations much better and much stronger. And I'd like to see that. So anyway, remember, 15 more days to November 6th, and that's voting days. Remember our slogan, remember November.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. I believe you've inquired about that bump coming in the building before, and the city manager has that and is investigating. We'll get back to you on that. Is there any other public comment? I see people moving in, and I'm not sure whether they're moving for seats or down to the... Okay. There are sign-ins for the public hearings. Have they moved to the back of the room now? The back? Right up here. Yes, welcome.
Yes, hi. My name is Gail Kite, and I did not know whether or not you said that this was an open period in which you can...
This is public comment for anything that's not on tonight's agenda.
Okay, fine. I don't know whether or not, I think that it has been brought up before, about the difficulties that the parents are having as far as their children attending a child care center. And these children range from anywhere from 6 months to 4 years, and having difficulty because of the signs that are now posted. And I'd like to find out when this could be put on the agenda, or if the center can be responsible for perhaps putting in a decal or some type of sign in the windshield so that the parents would not have to go completely out of their way just to get into the center with these children.
There have been some discussions, and I'm not sure when it's going to be on the agenda, but we're trying to come up with something.
All right, we'd appreciate it because young children do need to be cared for, and I thank you.
Thank you for reminding us of that
All right.
concern. Any other public comment on anything not on this evening's agenda?
Buddy Daniels, 19 Sherman Avenue, Tacoma Park. Real quickly, with the elections coming up in 2 weeks, as Pat said, remember to vote. I just want to remind everybody, and please let your neighbors know, the cards you get from the Board of Elections, please read, because the precincts in the city have been changed, and you may be voting at a different facility. If you're not sure where it is, I'll be up on the hill. I'm a precinct chair of one of the political parties. I'll be up on top of the hill at Tacoma Park Middle School, and I've got maps, and if you tell me where you live, I can tell you where to vote. So can the election judges, too, but that'll be my pleasure. And please vote. And the questions are somewhat complicated. This is my information on the questions, so please familiarize yourself with the questions. And remember that early voting starts next Saturday, the 27th, and will go through November 1st, and you can vote right at the Silver Spring Civic Center. I've forgotten the times, I'm sorry. Monday through Wednesday it's 8 to 8, and I believe Saturday it's 8 to 5, and Sunday 8 to 5. I'll be there Sunday and the rest of the days. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments on items not on this evening's agenda?
Yeah, my name's Karen Anderson. I live on Woodland Avenue, and I just want to make a comment about the recent street trees that have been planted. When we plant big street trees, you know, that'll go 50, 60 feet high, the sidewalks are affected, as are the curbs, and there's a lot of maintenance, and they do the brickwork. However, for handicapped people and for children and for people pushing strollers, this is not a good idea. So I think if we want to keep our tree canopy sufficient, we should plant them elsewhere, not on the streets where they're going to impede the sidewalks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We will now move to council comments. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Lots going on around our hood this Saturday. October 27th from 10 to 3, there's the fall book sale sponsored by the Friends of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library. The sale will be on the now tree-enhanced front lawn of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library, which, oh, by the way, is one of Tacoma Park's special jewels. Its staff and programs are the best, and this book sale helps to sponsor many of the special programs that occur at the library. This is another Tacoma Park event where I actually do a lot of holiday shopping. So there's some really great books, but get there early if you want any really good children's books, because they go very, very fast. The second event, and almost even more exciting, is the Recreation Department's umpteenth annual Halloween costume contest and parade, followed by a party. This begins at 5 p.m. Just around the Roscoe Statuette in Old Town. The costume judging starts at 5, and then the parade winds down the road from, I guess, goes down Carroll to Philadelphia to the community center where there's a party. This is always an exciting and fun event with some really great and innovative costumes. I will be at both events, but you probably won't recognize me at the holiday costume event because I will definitely be in a costume. So you'll have to really, really look hard to see if it's really me. And no city council meeting for this last year would be complete without gold stars. Super Gold Stars to both Daryl Braithwaite, Director of Public Works, and the City Arborist Todd Bolton for always quickly responding to my many requests, not only about sidewalks, but also about any tree issue that may rear its little branches during the course of any given week. This kind of service has been a huge support to me and the residents of Ward 3, and I applaud and appreciate all that they are able to do for the city and for the residents.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I've distributed to the council members a copy of, the city clerk has distributed to the council members a copy of text for a proposed flyer on 2012 election information that would be distributed by the Piney Branch Elementary School PTA via the backpacks to the students' families. It's purely nonpartisan information about voting, and I wanted to get the approval of the council to have this put on city letterhead for distribution through the PTA. Any comments? Okay. This, by the way, was something that was requested by the PTA president, Vineta Myers, who is a Maple Avenue resident.
Give us a minute to read it.
Sure.
Looks fine.
Can it go out at Tacoma Elementary as well, or is it only Piney Branch?
I'll ask there as well.
And even the middle school?
Yeah, I'll pursue that. The middle school has a much, well, okay. I'll pursue that.
It's okay with me.
Right.
Likewise.
I would just suggest if it's possible to fit in the actual voting locations, you know, the top 2, top 3. If it's Piney Branch parents, they would have at least, 2 or maybe 3 polling locations.
Okay,
The address.
I will look into that as well.
But even if you can't do that, you know, finalize it and go. It's just a suggestion, not a.
Okay.
I would support put it on city letterhead, but also if we could put it on the website, that would be helpful.
There's already information on the website. City Clerk, do you have the URL or?
It's on the main page, TacomaParkMD.gov.
This originated with something, by the way, that I had sent out to an email list and that Vineta Myers saw. Okay, so great. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you. In the interest of keeping things short, I just wanted to make one comment on one item, and that is to acknowledge the recent passing of a member of our New Hampshire Gardens community, which is part of Ward 6. And this was a gentleman by the name of Leon Brunson, who lived in the city and in this part of the city for many, many years. He was president of the New Hampshire Gardens Civic Association in 1999. He was 89 years old when he passed on August 31st. Unfortunately, there was no obituary death notice that was available, printed, but I happen to know Mr. Brunson, who was a very active member of our community in New Hampshire Gardens, took very seriously and paid close attention to what was going on. And he's quite a gentleman, but he was a very forthright person and spoke his mind very frankly and politely, but always with a good deal of wit and kind of a twinkle in his eye when he spoke to you, to let you know that he was deadly serious, but he still respected who he was talking to. And so he made me pay attention to what was on his mind. We didn't always agree on everything, but I had a huge respect for him. And so I just wanted to report his loss to our community. He'll be missed. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it.
If I might, I just want to mention, I didn't realize that he had passed. He was a member of the Tacoma Park Master Plan Advisory Group and was very active at that time about setting policies related to land use in Tacoma Park. And he was a wonderful person.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I remember him being active in a number of things and hearing from him on neighborhood issues quite often, and he was quite an individual. I have just one thing I wanted to remind people about. We had the joint meeting last week with the Montgomery County municipalities and the Montgomery County Council, and 5 of us attended. It was very interesting conversation about a number of topics, and I just wanted to let people know that there was a good deal of time spent talking about the effects of the revised maintenance of effort law in the state that now is making it very difficult for the county to fund other areas of government aside from education. They're looking at I think at this point, a 5.5% reduction across the board in all areas except the schools budget. So they're grappling with how to deal with their upcoming budget, given that maintenance of effort law and the revisions to it that make it so that they can't get waivers anymore. That tied into a discussion about transportation funding and how it's going to be very difficult for the state without some new revenues to fund transportation projects long-term, things like the Corridor Cities Transit Way, the Red Line in Baltimore, and the Purple Line, which is very important to us here in Tacoma Park. So there will be additional efforts required to get transportation projects going in the state. And the final thing that was talked about that kind of was this package of 3 things that's all about funding was the tax duplication discussions with the county. There is a scheduled Government Operations Committee work session on municipal tax duplication on Monday, November 5th at 2 o'clock in Rockville, and I think some of us will be there. Any other council comments? Seeing none, the city manager have any comments?
No.
Okay, we have 2 sets of minutes to adopt that we didn't adopt last week. These are the minutes from May 21st and June 4th. Would somebody like to move adoption of the minutes? Seconded. Been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the adoption of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. We will now move to our first public hearing of the evening, and this is the public hearing on the New Hampshire Gardens permit parking request. Was somebody going to just explain the kind of where we are in this process?
Certainly. So this is part 2 of the public hearing on the residential permit parking area request of the New Hampshire Gardens community. The first public hearing was not properly noticed by providing signs along the street in the proposed parking area. So we have taken that step, and in addition, the New Hampshire Gardens Citizens Association has met to discuss the proposal, and at their meeting, the group voted to support the residents' petition to establish a permit parking area. So the notice of the public hearing was mailed to all the residents in the affected area and somewhat beyond that. We've had the notice in the newsletter, and the map of the proposed area has been widely circulated. And tonight you're to hear public comments from the residents in the community and possibly others as well.
Okay, thank you. We will proceed with the public hearing on the New Hampshire Gardens permit parking zone. I'll just remind folks that this evening we have 2 public hearings, and my assumption is that a large number of people are going to want to speak at one or the other or both. So we're going to follow pretty strictly our format on public hearings. We'd ask you that you sign in at the table in the back of the room if you haven't already. I have the sign-in sheet for the New Hampshire Gardens public hearing, but tonight we do ask that you sign in to speak. So if you haven't signed in and you're going to speak at either one of the hearings, if you could go to the back of the room and sign in. We'll take speakers in the order that they sign in. I'll announce some follow-on speakers' names so people can get up and move toward the podium so that we can keep things moving. Each speaker will get 3 minutes to speak. There will be no second chances. The podium has lights and a timer. You'll be able to see the time that you have remaining on the timer on the podium, and the lights will let you know when time is getting close. And there's also a single beep at 30 seconds, and then it beeps when the 3 minutes are up. And I'll stop at this point, and we'll proceed with the public hearing. Jakaria Sangare, sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, followed by Antonio, I'm not sure what that last name is. Okay, and Jesse Johnson. Good evening.
Hello. Good evening. I'm here to talk about the parking zone being established around my house. I live at 1117 Kingwood Drive, and the establishment of this parking zone will have the effect of pushing the flood of cars on 1100 Kingwood Drive, and therefore one of the requests that I have is to consider extending the parking zone to 1100 Kingwood Drive if it's going to happen, because otherwise all the people that were parking on New Hampshire Avenue and on Kingwood Drive will simply go up the other streets, including my street, and cause the problem there. So that's my first request. The second request has to do with the fees that will be charged. I believe it's every 2 years or so. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly. And I would think that such fees should be waived, and at least for two residents at each address, at least. And those are my 2 comments.
Thank you. Antonio, and then Jesse Johnson, and then I'm not sure the first name, looks like the last name is Doby.
Yes, my name is Antonio Marvell. I live in 1115 Kingwood Drive. And just to pick back on what Jack said, I agree with what he's saying. We should be giving for household 2 permit for free. And I also want to know if that come in effect. That permit would be $20 for how long, and how often would it will go up, and how much we as residents have to pay. At the same time, also in the neighborhood where I live in my street, there are a lot of boarding houses. The people has not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 and 5 cars. So that's something that you guys have to take under consideration. That's all I have to say, and I appreciate
Marvel,
it.
you support extending the parking zone onto the 1100 block? I think
yes.
we probably have to do a separate petition process for that, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse Johnson.
Jesse Johnson, and I live at 1113 Kingwood Drive. And I would like to know that if the parking permit, when it goes into action, would it be 24/7 or would it just be for a number of hours? Because just has been said, that if you limit it to just the 1201 on Kingwood Drive, they come into our area because that's what happens when they have things going on at the church. When it gets filled up, they not only just park any way they can, they will turn around in your driveway and everything else. And another question, what will happen, because in the neighborhood there are a couple of houses that I know that have people moving in and out sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and they can have as many as 6 or 7 cars. How do you intend to take care of that, or how would that be? And that is something that you probably would have to look into, because if you are renting, it's a residential, supposed to be a residential neighborhood, but they rent out rooms and they got 5 or 6 renters, and sometimes they stay 1 or 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks, and that's a problem because you got all these cars stacked up, and if you don't have a driveway, you don't have any way to park.
Somebody want to?
First of all, I wanted to comment on the time of the permit parking area. On the cover sheet, there's actually a mistake. The request was to have limited parking between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. So it would be, the request is to have it 7 days a week, but it would be nighttime hours. So 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. is when parking would be limited. The city has established rules, the city police department has established rules for giving out the parking permits. And in order to receive a parking permit, the car must be registered at the address. So presumably if there's a renter there, they should have, their vehicle should be registered at the address where they're living. And that's what's required to get a parking permit. Each household is entitled to 2 visitor permits, so which can be given out to visitors of permit holders.
I have another question. If I had a visitor, would I be the one responsible for going to the police to get the permit for the visitor?
You'll receive, if you purchase a parking permit, your household will receive 2 visitor permits to keep and hold to use as you see fit for visitors.
Right. Okay, then, well, what happens if the people that live in that particular neighborhood and you got all these extra people that their cars don't have a permit on them? What happens? Do you call the police
They'll get
or
ticketed.
do you what?
They'll get ticketed.
They'll get ticketed.
Yeah.
Okay, because a lot of times things sometimes are going wrong and the police ride by and wave and they keep going. So you can't ticket anybody like that. I'm just saying what happened. And so how could they ticket you if they waving and keep them going? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Doby, Gail, yes, Gail Kite and Cecilia Gallagher.
My name is Jesse Doby. I live at 1113 Kingwood Drive also, and everything's been said that I was going to say, but another problem that we have around there. We who have driveways, we have a problem with people parking across our driveways. We have to almost fight sometimes to keep those people off. And you know, we shouldn't have to do that. But the police can ride through Kingwood Drive right by all this stuff and never do anything about it. So we need help. We need help from y'all to straighten this out. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you all.
Gail Kite, Cecilia Gallagher, Lance Pruitt.
No comment.
Okay. Cecilia Gallagher? No comment, all right. Lance Pruitt? Followed by Monique Royale and Lawrence Oquali.
Hello, I'm Lance Pruitt at 1201 Kingwood Drive. I was a member of the committee that first started the process of the parking zone proposition, and so I just wanted to address some of the concerns of some of the previous speakers. One, we did limit the area of the zone to parts of the ward that are directly affected by the parking issues. It was intentional because of the need to receive 60% agreement. We were afraid that people, households that were not being directly affected at present wouldn't support the proposal. So we were aware that that the zone could be extended at a later date if indeed parking becomes a problem on streets that are not currently affected. One reason that we initiated the process was we live very close to the Zion Lutheran Church on New Hampshire Avenue, and that church rents a meeting hall to anyone and everyone, apparently. And I'm repeatedly, weekend after weekend, forced to call the police in the wee hours of the morning. Just this past weekend, it was approximately 3 a.m. That I called the police because of the noise from parties that go on at the church. And our hope was to, by creating the overnight parking zone, that would help alleviate some of the noise that comes out of the church late at night. I know that other parts of the zone have a different problem, but I'm not directly affected by that, so I'll leave that to someone else to address. My hope is that the zone will go in place so that we can get a restful night's sleep on a weekend. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monique Royal, Lawrence Oquali, and Phil Olaf.
Good evening. My name is Monique Royal, 7312 New Hampshire Avenue. As Lance stated that we needed 60%, it was actually 66%, and we way exceeded that. The problem with the parking is my home sits directly across the street from New Hampshire Towers, basically. And I notice when I come in from work, people will get out of their cars and walk directly across the street, which prevents myself and my fiance from parking either in our driveway or in front of our house. I don't see why, as a resident, as someone who pays mortgage for that home, why I should have to park elsewhere. I shouldn't have to call the police to have someone's car removed because they're blocking my driveway. I shouldn't have to call the police because there are break-ins on my street, which there was one that occurred overnight. I don't understand why people that live across the street can be able to park in front of other people's homes and prevent us from parking where we live. They need to make sure that they have parking across the street. I don't like to have to come home and find parking. I shouldn't have to be forced to park up the street. I shouldn't have to be forced to, like I said, call the police to remove a car from in front of my home. When I'm trying to get ready for work in the morning, there was an instance where I had to call the police because there was a car blocking my driveway, blocking me from getting out of my own driveway in the morning. That was absolutely ridiculous. I really don't understand, and I'm getting to the point where I'm absolutely frustrated. And I don't know what can be done, but whatever can be done needs to be done, because I've had it up to here. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Lawrence Oquali, Phil Olaf, and Pat Holzbush.
I'm here to lend my support also to the last few speakers because I've had similar problems and I've had them so many times. I've had to call police a number of times because, again, as was said, the driveways are blocked. You can't even pass. This morning I had to park 3 blocks away because I couldn't get in, and I had to park and then sit and then wait until I saw someone coming from the apartment complex across the street to walk all the way down and move the vehicle, move her own vehicle for me to pull in and then park. It is something that we go through every day. It's not something that just happens once in a while. It happens every day. There have been weeks in which I had to call the police practically every single day. So it will be a great help for us, for the community, to get this problem resolved. Now, for those who have issues with regards to if the parking permit is set up, that it will affect their own block because practically they will extend to the other side. Now, that's where it's already been addressed. It's already been addressed because if the problem moves to the other block, they can always amend or request additional petition for that to be addressed. So, again, I'm at the epicenter because I'm on Merwood Drive, and I have seen strange things happen at night. I've seen cars being fixed in front of my driveway. I've seen trash being taken out of the car and dumped right on the ground. And even when you try to talk to the occupants of the vehicles, sometimes you yourself feel threatened by the way they will look at you and the way they will address you. And since your house is right across where the car is parked, sometimes you have to be very mindful how you speak, because they can throw stones into your house at night, or a lot of things can happen. That's my comment.
Thank you. Phil Olaf, Pat Holzbosch, and Linda Myers. Go ahead.
Hi, I also live on Merwood Drive, fairly close to New Hampshire Avenue, and just wanted to urge creation and implementation of the parking zone. We too have had a lot of problems with people parking in front of our house, non-residents parking in front of our house very late at night, coming back to their cars at 4 or 5 in the morning, slamming doors, blaring music, waking us up, throwing garbage on the median strip. And I think the parking zone, the permit parking zone is probably the only way to resolve that. I completely understand concerns that the spillover may spread to other parts of the neighborhood, but as other people have said, I think we can address that by sort of incrementally expanding the zone. So, generally speaking, I wish we could have. I'm generally fine with people parking in front of my house, but I think a lot of people have just been abusing the privilege, and so I'd urge creation of the parking zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Holzbosch, Linda Myers, Ted Green.
Hi, I'm Pat Holzbosch. I live, where do I live? I live on Wildwood Drive. And I have to say, we as we stand out in front of our house and look up and down the block, we don't have any of those problems. So maybe that's why I and my partner would speak against this. Let me just say that when I came to Takoma Park 13 years ago, what I valued always was its inclusivity. I came from Chicago, which is a pretty open-armed town, but Takoma Park, I felt like it was a place where I belonged because it felt like we welcomed people of all kinds, even if they're backgrounds and habits disagreed with our habits. And I have never thought of the street as belonging to me. I could understand if I had a driveway. I don't. I feel like wherever I can park within a couple of blocks is fine. I'm usually lucky enough on my block never to. I always am able to park in front of my house. So again, I haven't seen the problems in our neighborhood, and so maybe the answer is not to put permits on our block. I also want to say that when I think of permit parking, I think of gated communities. And it just makes me feel very sad to think about Tacoma Park becoming a permit parking area where only the people that we don't want to tolerate can park there. And it seems like the things that people are talking about, driveways, violence, things like that, could be dealt with in other ways. Maybe signs for driveways, maybe enforcement of driveways. But this seems to me to be an overkill, both in the extensiveness of it and as well as the way it's being, the permit parking itself, for problems that I'm not convinced will be solved by permit parking and that should be solved by other kinds of things, like police, enforcing laws that are already there about not parking in driveways.
Thank you. Linda Myers, Ted Green, and Orrin Newfill.
I wait for the light. I'm deaf, so I'm just going to talk at you. Okay. And we hope it's right. I'm Linda Myers. I'm also on Wildwood. I think the whole idea is a little elitist. Personally, I don't think we need it. I think you're trying to legislate things that don't have anything to do with parking stickers. If we have garbage, they get us garbage cans. I see beautiful new garbage cans out there. Get me some more of them. If there's parties going on in the church, then the cops ought to be coming in cleaning up the parties at the church. So I'm not sure that stickers is going to take care of any of these problems. If people are parking in people's driveways, then we need signs up there that say, don't park in the driveway. I've lived in Chicago where we have parking stickers near the beach because it's hard. Everybody wants to go to the beach, and if you live there, you can't park. So I get it. I do. The problem with that is you have parties. You have them at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. People are bringing their little picnic baskets. They've got their Jell-Os and all of that. And you've got to put all that stuff down and run back out there with the little parking pass. And what do you do when you have more than 2 people coming for dinner? It's a pain in the neck, I'm telling you. You're always having to think, what time is it when they come? Are they going to leave before 7 o'clock to make sure you put the pass out there? So really it becomes a burden to the homeowner. You have to pay for the sticker. You have to go and get the stickers. And you have to get the passes. Then you have to make sure you have the passes. You know where they are. You forget where you put them. Someone takes it. You put it in their car. They drive off with it. So then you have to go to town, get another pass. So really it becomes a burden on the homeowner, and I'm not sure any of this is going to solve the problem. I have been driving around. I don't think the parking is horrendous. There may be some specific issues, and I don't doubt that there are some certain blocks that have problems. For me, if people want to block 2 or 3 block walk to park on my street, and I have parking, I said power to them. Power to them. I understand that some people may have to walk a block, but this is not, I don't know what it is, but it's still the city to me. Tacoma Park is just like 2 miles from D.C. So I have friends who live in the city. They don't have stickers, and they park even farther from the homes than what people are complaining about. So from where I'm coming from, the streets belong to the people.
Thank you. Ted Green and Orrin Newfill.
Good evening, everybody. I live in the 1100 block of Kingwood Drive, and I believe that we, as a community, are overregulated. However, I understand all of the concerns about the parking, and this looks like something we are likely to move forward with. A couple of things I would just like to comment. I've lived on that block for 16 to 18 years and haven't had a lot of problem with parking, but it has increased some recently. And it's going to encourage me to do off-street parking, which I don't currently have, which is going to then make less parking spots. In terms of including Kingwood Drive as part of this proposal going forward, I don't think we need to do an impact study to know that across the street is going to be impacted. Okay? So if we're going to move forward with this, I'm going to strongly recommend that the 1100 block of Kingwood be included, because it will be impacted immediately. We don't have to wait to see what's going to happen 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. So if we go forward 1100 block should be included. Those are my comments.
Thank you. And the final person who signed up is Ort Newfill.
Yes, good evening. My name is Ort Newville. I live at 1114 Kingwood Drive. I have a problem with my parking. I'm a homeowner, and I think I should have free access to park where I live. Sometimes I come home, I got to find out a parking space. Vehicles block my street where I park, even block my walkway. So I notice you're going from the 1200 block of Kingwood Drive. So in future you will be coming over to the 1100 block. So I would like to know, I as a homeowner, we shouldn't have to pay to get a parking permit. So something should be done to protect our neighborhood with parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick comment from Councilmember Schultz.
That's all. Are there any other speakers?
That's it on the speakers.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted just to say, as your representative here on the City Council, I want to express my great gratitude for everybody coming here tonight, regardless of the position, in favor or in opposition. The main thing is that you came here tonight and you testified, and this is a terrific help to me, and it's terrific help to the City Council so that it can make wise decisions. In the event, I do want to say that in the event that the permit parking zone is approved by the City Council, and it would then get implemented, one of the very first things that I will do as your City Council representative is monitor, with your help, those people in the 1100 block of Kingwood, to monitor what is going on there in terms of the concerns that you have expressed, and if need be, we'll circulate. We can get a petition circulated to extend that permit parking to include the areas where you live. I've taken note on what everybody has said tonight, and now isn't the time. This is a public hearing for me to be going on and on about the details of all of this, but you know where to reach me. I live within the area that would be affected on Wildwood Drive, so communicate with me by email, knock on my door, or call my telephone number at home, and if you have questions, I'd be delighted to answer your questions going forward. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to go into all the details or the questions you might have tonight, but thank you for being here.
And we have scheduled tentatively a first reading ordinance establishing the parking area next week. We can move that if need be. Thank you all very much for testifying at that hearing. We will now move to our second public hearing this evening, and that's the public hearing on residency and advice and consent proposals. I'll just say again, if you want to testify at this hearing, we'd appreciate it if you'd sign in at the back table. We're going to follow the public hearing procedures pretty strictly this evening, since I assume we have a number of people who wish to speak. So we'd ask that you sign in to speak. We'll take speakers in the order that you sign in. I'll do as I just did in this one and announce a couple names in advance so that you can move toward the podium. You'll get 3 minutes to speak, and the podium has the lights and the timer, and there will be a single beep at 30 seconds, which can alert you that you might be ready to wrap up, and then it'll beep a couple times at 3 minutes. We ask that you speak on all of the items at one time, and I'll just say that after the hearing, the council will take a short break, then come back to discuss the items that are the subject of this public hearing. The accelerated timetable for the potential charter amendments, which was chosen by a majority of the council, necessitates a first reading of any charter amendment tonight, followed by a second reading after a minimum of 14 days. This puts second reading on Monday, November 5th. This is followed by a 40-day period when any proposed charter amendment can be petitioned to referendum. If there's no successful petition, the charter amendments would be effective on the 50th day, which is December 25th. Following consideration of any charter amendments, which are item 3 on the agenda, the council will consider any changes to city code. These do not have the same format as charter amendments and are on the agenda to be considered tonight as well. These are items 4 and 5 on the agenda. If it gets to be quite late, we could carry those items over to next week's council meeting, where I've left time to accommodate that if needed. The clerk has compiled all written comments that were submitted to her in person, by mail, and by email to clerk@tacomagov.org. Those comments will be included in the public record of this hearing. The council has copies of those comments at the dais. Thank you for your interest and participation and your attendance. We'll now open the public hearing on residency and advice and consent proposals, item 2 on our agenda. And we've been joined at the dais by the city attorney. The first people who signed up are Pat Lovelace, Diana Cohn, Doug Ziegler, and Tom Forehand. Mr. Lovelace.
Hi, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, your official peace delegate. And I'd like to mention, as far as my city manager, I think it'd be very good if we could have our city manager living within our city. If she wanted to move into our city and become the city manager, I think that'd be okay. But I think we should have our city manager living and managing our city from within. Because I know, it's for personal experience, I lived and worked in the same building doing building restoration. And I cared more about my environs than I did when I did not live and work there. I cared more about the job, how it was coming out. And I cared more about the neighborhood where I was working. And I met the people, and they meant a lot more to me than otherwise. So I think it would be the same thing if we had our city manager working and living in our city. I think that would be great. And I think the city manager, city council should have permission to decide about the heads of departments. They should have part of the decision in hiring them. I think if the city council has no decision on the hiring and firing of these people, we lose a valuable backup in case something goes wrong, in case we get somebody in there who none of us like. And if we have a manager or something who refuses to do anything about it, and the city council wants to do something, we have no way of taking it up. And I think, our city manager should be able to work with our city council and decide, on who's going to be the department heads and who's not. Because I think it's very important, as far as our city operations are concerned, is to have our city council taking a really good active role in this. And as far as our city manager, like I said, we need her to live and work in our city, to become part of our neighborhood, to become part of our city. Tacoma Park is a wonderful home-like small town environment. I'd like to keep it that way. And having our city council living in our city at the same time will really help with that. It'll help keep our nice neighborhood feeling, because we could walk on by and say, how you doing? And she'll be saying, how you doing? And she'll be saying, it's part of our city. And I love that. And again, please, let the city council take active role in our decisions on state, on heads of departments. Please, because it really could make a big difference if something should go wrong. If we have a troublemaker or someone we don't approve and never do well, and our department heads not doing their job right, the city council should be able to make a decision on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep the peace.
Diana Cohn, Doug Ziegler, Tom Forehand.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. Diana Cohn. I have been a resident at 16 Jefferson Avenue for 30 years. I am proud to be a resident of Tacoma Park, and when choosing a new city manager, I believe it is important to find someone who would be willing and proud enough to live in Tacoma Park that they would be willing to join our community too. The same applies to heads of departments for many of the same reasons that you just heard. I have no particular opinion about how you go about instituting a residency requirement as long as it happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Ziegler, Tom Forhan, and Kausar Talat.
Good evening. I'm Doug Ziegler. I live at 109 Sheridan Avenue. Moved to Tacoma Park in 1956, and I support the charter amendment. I think it's in the city's best interests if the people who are deciding how to spend our money are in the same boat as the rest of us. If they're paying the same taxes and receiving the same services that they dispense, I think our interests are better served.
Thank you. Tom Forhan, Kausar Talat, and Roger Schlegel.
Good evening. Thanks very much for the opportunity to testify on this. My name is Tom Forhan. I've been a 26 years resident in the Waco neighborhood on Westmoreland Avenue. And tonight I'm representing the position of Waco that was came to at a meeting where we discussed these proposals on September 29th. WACO agrees that to oppose all changes to the existing charter and code regarding employment with the city. I won't read the detailed letter that of October 18th that you folks should have in your packets, and I'll also note that the alternative ordinance was not discussed at the meeting. I'm not even sure that it had raised its head at that point, but we have no position on the alternative ordinance. But I do want to summarize our points, and that is, first, at the meeting, we didn't understand what problem this was trying to fix. We didn't see any critical failures in the government, any issues that could have been solved by had this been in place. So that was our first problem, and it was kind of like, I think it says in the letter, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We didn't see what the problem was. We didn't see a failure. We strongly felt that several of the changes will limit recruitment of qualified individuals for city government, and waivers were also discussed. There was a general feeling that whatever happens, Tacoma Park already has a reputation for establishing kind of some idealistic principles and then not being able to follow through on them and coming back by having to waive those principles. Certainly whatever is decided, the city should be able to stick with it and not have to waive it left and right like we do other things. We also believe that the changes might bring, I think unintentionally, but some exclusivity and discrimination to filling this particular position. Whether it's religious was one example that was brought up, but we clearly were concerned that there may be some elements of exclusion here that may affect hiring. Perhaps more solidly, I think the changes will also blur the lines between administration, oversight, and accountability. And this is a fundamental shift in our government and our strong manager system that we think has served us very well. I also want to bring up quickly a personal concern. The level of civil discourse on this topic has really gone downhill. I think many of you have seen this before. But at the same time, it shows the importance of feelings on the issue and that these feelings run deep. I ask that you work together with your constituents, however, to solve this problem and to use your leadership to bring Tacoma Park together on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kausar Talat, Roger Schlegel, Francis Phipps.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kausar Talat. I live at 8010 Flower Avenue in Ward 5. My husband is Troy Jacobs, and he sent in a written statement to Jesse because he couldn't be here tonight. In fact, we thought that this was so important, we got a babysitter to take care of our kids so that I could come and speak. We are very strongly opposed to the charter amendment. We think that the residency requirement is discriminatory. You can't hire the best available person if you require them to live within the small confines of Tacoma Park. It's one thing if you're hiring somebody from Minnesota to say, oh, you should move your family and uproot it and change their schools to come and live in Tacoma Park. But if somebody lives in Silver Spring or College Park, to say, uproot your family and move them 3 miles over into the city border, seems a little bit ridiculous. And I think that the person who is the best candidate, no matter where they live, should be hired to serve as our city manager and as the department heads, because we need qualified managers, not necessarily citizens of the city. There may be citizens of the city who are qualified managers, but I don't think we should restrict that and be exclusive. The other thing that I'm concerned about is if we actually hire somebody to be the city manager who lives in a ward, they may favor their ward over the rest of the wards. And I've seen a lot of give and take from the different wards over my time here in Tacoma Park, and that's actually a strong concern of mine. I'd almost prefer somebody who didn't have the ward pressures on them when they're representing the entire city and not just one part of it. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger Schlegel, Francis Phipps, Catherine Wakeland.
Hi, I'm Roger Schlegel, 6512 Allegheny Avenue. I have a master's in public administration, and so I'm a big fan of the strong manager form of government, which was really introduced in the early 1900s in a move to promote professionalism in the administration of cities and smaller municipalities. So I see a lot of good arguments for focusing on hiring a professional person and not being so concerned about where that person lives. I think you can trust a true professional to do their job well. I worked for a city before without living in it, and I didn't commit myself any less to the work by not living there. I do see a couple of arguments for residency, which would be it's environmentally friendly because the commute is less, and that the city manager would feel the tax burden that we all feel. But I don't think the city manager makes the decisions about how much money is being spent. You all, as the council, make those decisions. In a larger sort of big picture thought, I wanted to point out that, how do I put this? It sounds like people on both sides of this question are hoping to ensure some kind of control over the city manager, to make sure the city manager will, as a number of people are saying, share our values. And a soft way of trying to do that is to insist that the person will live in town and hope that sort of by osmosis of getting to know the community and their neighbors, they will share our values. I would just caution that we don't all share the same values in Tacoma Park. We're a diverse community. So let's not assume we're a monolithic culture. The other approach to trying to get some control is to initiate this advise and consent clause. And there again, I think that the council needs to think carefully about how they want to commit their time. You are volunteers in a city of volunteers, and you only have so much time to do the important work you have to do. So if you decide to commit to meaningful review of resumes of department heads, you need to also decide what you are going to let go of. What sorts of policy decisions and deliberations, what sorts of long-range planning are you going to have to defer or forego? And I, for one, would love to see our council doing more of that policy and planning level work and then allowing a professional city manager to do the implementation. So, in other words, it's not so much about the person you get, but it's about the direction you give that person. Thank you.
Thank you. Francis Phipps, Catherine Wakeland, Kathy Porter.
Francis Phipps, 7210 Holly Avenue. I've submitted my comments for the record, and I'm not going to repeat all of them. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to summarize these. I'm also speaking against the proposed amendments here, And I'm also would like to thank you for serving on the council. I myself would find it a terribly thankless job, but you're in a position to do great good for the community. You're also in a position to create great mischief. Unfortunately, my reading of the effect of these proposed amendments is that you would be causing great mischief. You're proposing, we know, to require the city manager to live in the city, to reside in the city. Perhaps the senior staff reside in the city. You are also extending the involvement of the council in hiring decisions of what is going to be the city manager's team. These three proposals, plus the proposal to then incorporate and solidify these changes in changing the city charter, I believe we have won the trifecta of bad management proposals. Now, I know we like to do things completely, but I think that probably these proposals came from an idealistic bent to solve a problem. I'm not quite sure what the problem is, but I'm sure it was in the Tacoma Park mode an idealistic approach to try to make the city manager, as I understand it, more sensitive. But while we like you to be idealistic, that is part of Tacoma Park. We don't want you to be naive about the impact and the long-term consequences. I think it's naive to not think that requiring residency for the city manager would not severely limit the number of qualified candidates. Also very severely limit the ability of the manager to put together her team with a greater involvement of the city in who she hires. Lastly, where is accountability? Others have mentioned it. Where does the buck stop? If somebody is not performing, who do we as citizens hold accountable? City manager? Are those council members who have voted for them? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Catherine Wakeland, Kathy Porter.
I'm Catherine
Diane
Wakeland. I live at 7218 Holly Avenue in Tacoma Park, and I submitted written comments because I didn't think I would be able to be here, and I'm not going to repeat that. I just find it very strange that I've lived here over 40 years, and this is the first time I've ever stood here arguing for the status quo and against any changes. I mean, it's really bizarre, and it's also bizarre that this is all such a hurry-up thing. I know that you're trying to hire a new city manager, but I think that charter amendments are really a whole lot more important than any individual situation. It's really hard to change a charter. The last time I took a course in city government was 35 years ago, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember that changing a charter, changing a constitution is really, really hard. And I guess the final thing that I would ask, which sounds totally inconsistent with everything I've said so far, but as I say, I've lived in Tacoma Park a very long time, is that if you do decide to have a residency requirement, please have a residency requirement. Don't have exceptions, don't have wiggle room, don't have waivers, have a residency requirement, but don't do something that looks like one thing and operates like another. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kathy Porter, Diane Berkeley, and Enid Hodis.
Good evening, members of the council. I'm Kathy Porter. I live in the 1000 block of Elm Avenue. As you may remember, I testified on this issue before you in July, and I'm not going to repeat my previous concerns except to remind you that I opposed both of the original proposals. I am glad to see that there are compromise proposals that are before you. I think these compromises would, in fact, go a long way toward achieving your goals without the negative consequences that I outlined in my previous discussion. First of all, on the residency requirements, I think nobody disagrees that all other things being equal, it is desirable for the city manager to live in the city. The only question is, what's the best way to accomplish that? An absolute requirement, even if you do go with a waiver that would allow you to waive this requirement in certain cases, will discourage some candidates for city manager. In effect, you are deciding that this requirement, this residency requirement, is more important than the other requirements, the other qualifications that you're looking for in a city manager. A better way would be to establish a preference for someone who would be willing to live in the city, which would allow the selection committee and allow you to see all the candidates, both those who are willing to live in the city and those who are not, and make your own decision about how to weigh that willingness against the other qualities that you're looking for in a city management. This is more complicated when you're talking about residency requirements for department heads. The city manager may do a national search, but in most cases the candidates for city department heads would be close to home. For these people, moving to the city could prove a hardship. A residency requirement, a residency preference, not a requirement, would allow the city manager to find the best candidate for the job, taking into account that and all the other qualifications. In terms of the council role in hiring department, well, let me just reiterate. The bottom line is that if the residency requirement is more important than the other qualities you look for in the department, in a city manager or a department head, then you should go ahead and do your previous proposal, because that is in fact what you are deciding. The residency requirement is the most important thing you're looking for. Now, in the council role in deciding department heads, first of all, I believe that you are entitled to be informed about the process of hiring department heads. In my experience, the two previous city managers did that with the council. They even involved the council in briefings about prospective selections before those selections were announced to the public. If there were questions, I remember there were questions. I don't remember that there were serious concerns, but those certainly would have been addressed had those been brought up. This is very different than requiring a council vote on department head selections. Incorporating council suggestions and keeping the council apprised is good council-city manager relations. By contrast, requiring a council vote signals that you do not trust your city manager to make good personnel decisions. You can be sure that the best candidates for city manager will also see a required vote on their department head selections as a red flag for problems with the council and will hesitate to apply for this position. Right now, as you begin your hiring process, you are in an excellent position to shape the way you interact with the new city manager. After the city manager is selected, the council will set your expectations for the manager's performance, which gives you an excellent opportunity to incorporate your concerns into doing a new way of doing business, and that's what I would strongly suggest you do.
Thank you. Diane Berkeley, Enid Hodes, Robert Lanza. Okay. Enid Hodes.
Okay. My name is Enid Hodes. I live at 7418 Hancock Avenue, and I've lived in Tacoma Park for over 30 years. And I would just like to say that I strongly oppose having a residency requirement, especially for city manager, for a lot of reasons. I think the quality and the capability of the candidates is what is really important. I think that that is really what you should be aiming for. Also, if, for instance, there are many reasons that someone may not be able to locate in Tacoma Park. It might be too expensive, their spouse might work in some place like Baltimore, and it would be too far for them to commute. They'd have to uproot their kids and bring them into a new school. There are all kinds of reasons that I think that they might not want to or be able to become residents. And my feeling is the same for department heads. I see no reason to have them be required to be city residents. And again, I think competency is what you should look for, competency of the candidates. I also think you're limiting yourself in the pool of qualified candidates if you make that a requirement.
Thank you. Robert Lanza, Keith Berner, Karen Anderson.
Hi, I'm Robert Lance. I live at 7215 Cedar Avenue. I am serving on the current city manager search committee, and I also served on the previous city manager search committee that recommended Barb Matthews. I wanted to address the residency requirement very quickly. When we were on the city manager selection committee that recommended Barb Matthews, my view and the view of others who were on the committee was that Barb Matthews was by far the most qualified and professional candidate that we interviewed. That being the case, we did not need to ask the question of whether Barb Matthews would have applied to the position or whether any of the other candidates who applied at that time for the position, because there was no city council passed residency requirement. I can't answer the question of who would or would not have applied had there been a firm residency requirement, but I can say that we may not have been able to select the most qualified candidate at that time. We may be in this same situation this time, where certain candidates may not apply, and we would not know which candidates don't apply because of a hard and fast residency requirement. Now, that being said, as former Mayor Porter mentioned, if you're going to have a residency requirement, that's your focus, then let it be a residency requirement. But if you want to focus on the qualifications of the candidates, then you need to focus on the qualifications of the candidates. That's my view. With respect to advise and consent, a couple of people who were floating comments around on the listserv in Ward 1 had mentioned that this is the local equivalent of a constitutional amendment. And you need to think about that from the standpoint of not what your actions may be concerning passing this advise and consent requirement, but what every future council would do with this new authority. The first time you council members, current or future, get into a position where you're getting into a 4-3 vote on a discussion of a hiring decision, and that might not be the city manager's first choice for that hiring position, you've broken the relationship between the city manager and the city council. What you're writing down as a requirement is not going to be a consensus-based process. It is going to be a process by which you vote on hiring decisions. Those votes are not going to be 6-0. They might be 4-3. And that's something that you need to consider what future councils may do when they get into a discussion of 4 members of the council want candidate A and 3 members of the council want candidate B. You have to think about what happens at that point, because that would severely damage the relationship between the future city manager, whoever that person would be, and your activities in making hiring decisions. And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith Berner, Karen Anderson, Dan Robinson.
I oppose these proposals. Regarding a council veto right over staff appointments, first, if the goal is to have the council be more involved in key decisions, including hiring by the city manager, this proposal shoots at the wrong target. What is needed is a collaborative relationship, not a single negative power. By the time the council starts vetoing appointments, the underlying relationship is in trouble. The trouble should be prevented, not addressed obliquely and after the fact. Second, does Tacoma Park's strong city council, city manager government model need to be revisited? I'm dubious, and here is the most important objection to this charter amendment. It appears to be a first strike on the entire model. If we are to fundamentally re-examine our form of government, surely detailed justification needs to be provided and consideration needs to take place over an extended period of time with in-depth analysis of alternatives and impacts. Third, if we are going to change our charter, the equivalent of the U.S. Constitution, it should be to simplify it and leave us with operational flexibility. We should be removing provisions like this from our charter, not adding them. Regarding residency, the primary objections are, first, a residency requirement ipso facto reduces the pool of willing and qualified candidates. To the extent that skills, temperament, and experience are important, it is vital to draw from the largest pool possible. Residency can always be given more or less weight once the applications are in, but an application that never comes in can't be evaluated. Second, staff below the city manager are not compensated highly enough to be required to live in our expensive city. In a broad sense, my objection to these proposals has been with the process. We have seen an unwillingness on the part of the council majority to discuss rationales. We have also seen inflexibility on their part in the face of reasonable alternatives and overwhelming opposition to these proposals as written. And we have seen the council prioritize speed over quality results. So what alternative course should we take? The proposed charter amendment should be dropped entirely for the time being. If the council-city manager relationship needs reconfiguration, and I have no objection to taking a look at this, take the proper time to do it right. Regarding the residency requirement, I see a basis for compromise. First, for city manager candidates from outside the metropolitan area, establish a firm in-city requirement. That is, if you are moving to this region to accept the provision, you must live in Tacoma Park. Second, for those within the metro area, establish a heavy weighting criterion that prefers residency, perhaps giving partial credit for those who live a certain distance from Tacoma Park. Third, if we are going to look at a residency for staff at all, it must be a very light weighting criterion. And fourth, use the job description and candidate evaluation processes for these requirements. Law and charter changes serve only to tie the hands of future Tacoma Parkers. Everyone in Tacoma Park favors a good and balanced council-city manager relationship, and we would all love for city staff to live among us. Doesn't this provide the foundation for a compromise? And that ultimately is what I call on the council majority to do, work with us rather than against us to bring about positive change. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Anderson, Dan Robinson, Catherine Gibney.
I'm Karen Anderson on Woodland Avenue. Boy, you guys really have a lot of things going on tonight. I came to say that I was in favor of having the city manager be a resident. However, when I'm listening to some of the other people, like what the lady brought up about would this person then favor their ward, that's a problem. And then the other part would be, I thought that if all things were equal, we would give residency an extra point there and do that. But I'm really confused now. I don't know how I feel now. I mean, after listening to everybody. So I'll just wait. I think what Kathy Porter said was very sensible, quite frankly. And then the gentleman over there too. So I envy you all your work.
Thank you.
That makes it all better.
Sounds like she's qualified for the council.
Dan Robinson, Catherine Gibney, and Paul DeStachio.
Hi, I moved to Grant Avenue 27 years ago, and I guess I don't envy you your work right now. I'm for some preference for residency. I think it's a good idea. I think I support strengthening the connection between staff and citizens through the elected officials. I just think those are good ideas, and that seems like where you're headed. I was thinking about what Sammy would do in this whole thing. And I've lived here for 5 mayors, and I can't remember exactly how many city administrators or managers, but somewhere 5, 6, 7 in that range. I didn't much like Sammy, to tell you the truth, because he was such a kind of a bully at some time, and he was a very strong mayor, and he wanted control, and he had a weaker manager. He had a city administrator at that time. I don't know if he would have approved of sharing the wealth of okaying department heads. On the other hand, he was very much a believer in a strong council. He brought in the ward system, as far as I know, and he was very much a believer in democracy. And I think he was a believer in kind of grassroots, in some sense, grassroots connection between citizens and staff through the council. So I think he would have. I think he would have been in favor of the advice and consent. And I've heard the pros, the fears and the hopes, and the fears and the hopes for those in favor of your proposal and against. And I'm in favor of it. I think that professionalism has a very important role, and we've seen it grow since Sammy Abbott in the city. But pros can be aloof to some extent, and I think that's probably what some of the sense of where you're coming from is, and I agree with that. And I don't think that's idealistic. I think that's just common sense. And having been in your position for a few years, it's more than just idealism. So my hope is that it would strengthen the ties I have some experience talking about it. Mayor Beater in Boise, Idaho, I've shared this before, was very much in favor of council having hiring authority, or at least some say and authority in hiring of department heads. And the expert who always speaks at the MML conferences was very much in favor of casting or of shaping whatever kind of charter fit, and that meant whatever people you wanted in that charter. So I don't think that's anything that holds you back. So the communication is much better now. Lack of a meaningful interaction with staff breeds suspicion. I do have some experience with that. People trust their elected officials who want to represent them, and you're more than just a policy body, and discussions are good. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Gibney, Paul D'Estasio, Colleen Clay.
My name is Catherine Gibney, and I approach this just from your citizen in the street, just trying to live here and having, a lot of involvement with different apartments. After listening to everybody, maybe I'm wrong about this, but, I think the structure of this amendment would help accountability, which I have some questions about with some areas within the government. And let me explain that I'm a 13-year resident of Tacoma Park. Like a lot of people living here have lived all over the world, but Tacoma Park is my hometown of choice. A large number of years before I moved to this area, I was visiting my relatives in Virginia. I wanted to see the University of Maryland, but got lost on Carroll Avenue. I was intrigued. I got out, had a cup of coffee, read The Voice, Nuclear Free Zone. I was sold. Someday I will live here. I went back to my job as editor and reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I then joined a congressional campaign. He won, and I was in Washington. As soon as possible, I bought a house in Tacoma Park, adopted kids from Russia and Ukraine who have grown up here. It's not Moscow or Kiev, that's their hometown, but Tacoma Park. Since my residency, I've had 3 or 4 very disappointing, serious issues with some departments. Incidentally, not the rec department. They've been great with my kids. But it was always surprising to me. I noticed that they were employees who did not live here in Tacoma Park, and frankly, it was sort of obvious to me in their manner of dealing. They seemed to know nothing about our culture. They must have never read The Voice. But regarding my issues and decisions they made, there seemed not to be enough accountability on their part for my disagreement with them or their manner. It was just, this is it and that's it. I would hope that the structure of the amendment would address this accountability, which I have found lacking in some departments. It causes me sticker shock when I add up the taxes I have paid in my 13 years and then to run smack into some serious accountability issues. And I also would like to say, speaking of accountability, I've always been bothered by the lack of a hard news newspaper in this town. I think this would also help in the area of accountability. Since this is my background, I'm really looking into, what's going to happen now that The Voice has folded, and I hope that there will be a newspaper with hard news coverage along with the community journal nature of The Voice. Don't know if it will happen, but I will continue to fantasize.
Thank you. Paul D'Estasio, Colleen Clay, Karen Vernon.
Good evening, Paul D'Estasio, 19 Pine Avenue. Let me start off with regards to the advice and consent issue with perhaps a little bit of history or background. I, along with former Mayor Del Giudice, co-chaired the committee on the council that, in fact, amended the charter to give the city a strong mayor and a strong city manager, and to give the manager the right to, the council the right to hire the manager, and the manager the right to manage the city, which means they hire their crew. They hire their team, and if they don't perform, they fire their team. The team that the council oversees should be the city manager. Don't abdicate your responsibility by, passing the buck. If you like what the city manager does, that's fine. If you don't, then they need to move on. The issue with, certainly an issue, and since Mr. Robinson brought up Sam Abbott, the issue of politicization of the department heads if they are reporting to the council, because believe me, if the council has the oversight, then they're going to report to the council, undermine the city manager, and basically make political appointees of the city heads as well. Case in point, Mr. Abbott was in support of a police chief by the name of Tony Abbott. He got enough, Tony Fisher, and he got enough council members on his side, although it was a 4-3 split. And Tony, who did a remarkable job for his 10 years in this city, spent a lot of time playing politics with the council. And I think that pretty clearly that's not the way that this council and this city needs to go. I think that the city needs to exercise strong oversight over the city manager and expect that the city manager is going to do their job. With regard to residency, to me, it's an issue in search of a problem. I just don't see it. If, in fact, this council wants the city manager to live in the city, then hire somebody that lives in the city. You don't need to do a charter amendment. You don't need to tie the hands of future councils. You know, the same thing with the city heads. If you want to give preference to a city head, then the council should give direction to the city manager. You hire somebody who lives in the city. You can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of sex or race or religion or any of that kind of stuff. You can discriminate against them if they don't live in the city. If you want somebody who has to live in Hyattsville, hire somebody who lives in Hyattsville. Doesn't matter. It's your prerogative. But don't tie the hands of the city council and future city council, and don't lock future councils into your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen Clay, Karen Vernon, and Thomas Lutke.
You guys all know me pretty well, but what you may not know is that when I was in college, after I decided that I wasn't going to be a famous musician and I wasn't going to be a famous journalist, and that there were too damn many psychologists in the college system for me to get into these psychology classes, I decided to become a city manager, and actually studied that in public administration in my undergraduate program and also in graduate school at Berkeley when I was in the city planning program. So I know a little bit about it. And I support residency for the city manager. I'd like the city manager to be somebody who wants to live in the community that they serve in. I think it's different than the other positions. And the other thing is that it's the norm for the field. I can tell you, having been through the classes with other aspiring city managers, that if you weren't expecting to live in the community where you worked, you were really limiting your own job choices. I think there should be a limited waiver, and to address many of the issues that people have brought up about favoritism, you need to delineate what those limits are so that it doesn't run into the area where you run across charges of discrimination in that, and I think it should be very limited. Somebody made the point about favoritism, and a lot of points were made today of people who oppose it that I think are good cautions that you should listen to, because even though I support a lot of these, I think there's some good cautions that people should pay attention to. One of them is a residency and ward favoritism, and I would say, we have a mayor who's elected at large and lives in one of our wards, and I think that's a good look at, do we have ward favoritism from our mayor? I don't think that just because you live in a particular ward in the city means that that's the case, and I don't think that our mayor favors the ward that he lives in, and I don't think that you'd have to expect that from the city manager. And people talk a lot about culture and the city manager understanding the culture, and I think it's something to understand Tacoma Park. You got to live here for a while to get it. To me, it's about understanding what it's like to drive on the potholes in 410 every day, more than it is for them to understand some of the other cultural aspects. And that is something that isn't unique to Tacoma Park. It's just about being a part of the city and living in the community. I support incentives for department heads and emergency management personnel to live in the city. And I talked about this when I first got elected. What could we do to get more of our police officers with their take-home cars to live in the city? I support amending the charter to strip out the specifics that don't belong there. Move those items into the city code. The council manager form of government is also worthy of discussion. I think this should be a broader discussion with proactive community consultation. I'll say, you guys have a problem, and it's that you can't discuss the problem that's leading to why you want to make the changes. That's a challenge because it's about a specific relationship. I think that you can turn that into a positive thing, though, because you shouldn't make changes based on individual relationships. I encourage you to take this and make lemonade out of the lemon that it is. And when you look at the changes, think about how you can make changes that will live and that aren't about a problem that you have with an individual person, that are about the structure of the government and good for the structure overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Vernon, Thomas Lutke, and Eric Pilsk.
I'm here to support the residency requirement. I think that, as other people have said, I'm proud to live in Tacoma Park. People in California told us about Tacoma Park and told us it was the place that we would have to go. We sought it out and chose it, and it seems a little bit shamefaced to think that this would be a tremendous barrier to someone else. I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy to say that you would only have lesser qualified applicants if you had a residency requirement. You would have a different pool. You would have a pool of people who are willing and able to relocate in an industry where that is not an unusual requirement for a city manager. I also am supporting the advice and consent role for the city council. I think that it provides a more responsive government for citizens if their elected officials have some responsibility over our department heads. In my sort of kitchen table experience of the city government, the idea that a city council person would select someone who is lesser qualified as a sort of political spoil system, the city council person is the one who would receive all the blowback from that, all the phone calls at home from unhappy citizens from an unqualified department head. And I think it is not fair to claim that this is a radical, either of these things are a radical or overly political maneuvers, because I think that they're very good questions that can be civilly discussed, and they are not unusual or radical ideas in city government. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a moment to say the remaining names that we have signed up, so that if there's anybody who wishes to testify who hasn't signed up, please do so at the sign up in the back. The last names on the list are Thomas Lutke, Eric Pilsk, Mary Rooker, and Larry Robinson.
Thank you. It's good to be here this evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'd like to associate my comments with the WACO letter and other of the people who've spoken tonight. I have submitted my comments for the record to you. I am opposed to the proposal to change the city charter in both of the aspects about the residency requirement and the advice and consent. A lot of these have already been said. Of course, I think the fundamental philosophy is strong. Everybody wants the city government to be responsive, for us to feel like we all belong to the same community, share values. It's a wonderful idea. I'm simply concerned that this is not the way to conduct the local government, when we should really, I think the first order of business needs to be the underlying political philosophy and aspirations towards professionalism in this community. Regarding the requirement for limiting for requiring residency, I do believe it does limit the possible candidates of qualified people. This is a very small constituency, and to think that you would get the fullest range of qualified people in this small place, I do not think is actually rational. I myself have lived in Maryland since 1991, and I was hired as the city architect for the city of Alexandria, and actually commuted there for several years, and that was an enormously great experience for me. And I'm thinking it was also, my feedback was that it was a very good experience for the city of Alexandria as well. That would not have been possible if I'd been forced to uproot myself from this area and move across the river. Regarding the requirement for advice and consent, I believe that this does undermine a fundamental relationship of accountability between the members of the council and the executive branch, which is headed by the city manager. There is the danger is that you create a politicized dynamic in which all sorts of other side relationships, discussions can be made. It is, I think, really appropriate in a civil society for the city manager to be ultimately responsible for creating the team and being able to execute the policies which are actually set by this body, the City Council. So I'd like to just leave with the idea that I don't understand where exactly this is coming from. I think that these are bigger issues that affect us all and should be taken very seriously, deliberately, and with the due course of time, not rushed through. I'm struggling to understand why this would be coming before us, and I just want to leave you with my comments that I think we need to be more deliberate in changing the city charter.
Thank you. Eric Pilsk, Mary Rooker, and Larry Robinson.
Hi, good evening. Eric Pilsk. I live just up the hill at 15 Philadelphia. I want to join with the others who've spoken in opposition to the charter amendments. I think they've made most of the points that I would want to make, and I've submitted additional comments in writing. The one thing that struck me, though, is that the purpose and the goal we should have in hiring the city manager should be to find the best person for the job. And if you do your job right and someone gets through the vetting process and you hire the best person, they will do a good job whether they live in this city or not. Conversely, if you don't hire the right person, having them live here isn't going to make them any better and isn't going to overcome their shortcomings of qualifications. And furthermore, you may find that you don't even get to interview the best person because they couldn't meet the residency requirement. I think you're tying your hands behind your back and harming the city's ability to get the best people for the job if you take that route. Similarly, with the advising consent proposal, I strongly agree with the other comments that it politicizes a process that absolutely shouldn't be politicized, and political in the way of undercutting authority and responsibility and allowing people to, in short, go behind other people's back in a relationship where that really has no place. And I, again, strongly urge you not to adopt that measure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mary Rooker and Larry Robinson.
Hi, Mary Rooker, Larch Avenue, Ward 2. I favor a residency requirement because it's a standard of good governance. And there are many wise reasons for this standard. Residency in the town in which you work is expected of city managers. We are the exception by not expecting it. Candidates who seek a city manager job without being willing to live in that city are the exception, and they are the ones imposing any limitation, not the city. I can see the benefit of someone living right over the city line on Piney Branch Road or Tacoma, D.C., so I favor minor flexibility outside the legal city limit, but only within the Tacoma Park area, what we would all understand as the Tacoma Park area, not the greater Metro D.C. area. If Tacoma Park intends to violate the norm and not require residency or near residency, I would like to know what extenuating circumstances justify such an unusual move. It can't be the cost of living issue, as that is factored into the salary. I don't feel strongly for a residency requirement on all department heads. I think a preference is okay. I also support the intention behind the advice and consent confirming council vote on department head hires, primarily because the city manager, no matter how wonderful, is not an elected official. I think it's important to have an elected body engaged in those selections. Such engagement also facilitates communication between the city manager and the council as well as the people. However, I think a better alternative might be to have the city council set goals, direction, and metrics for which department heads would be held accountable. And I support that as well. Clear and transparent direction would focus on goals and issues, not personalities. My comments are on general principles about best practices for good governance and a healthy balance of power between the elected council and the unelected staff. My comments are absolutely not a personal reflection on this or any other council, department heads, the outgoing city manager, or anyone else. You don't have to wait until you have a problem to justify repairing a known error. In fact, it's best not to wait. I haven't heard even one good reason from anyone about why Tacoma Park should violate standard best practices, so I'm baffled as to why this proposal appears to be so controversial. I hope you will support it and even review other possible changes. I'm concerned, however, by the depth of sentiment on both sides of this issue. When feelings run this deep, mediation is often prudent. I'm a typical Tacoma Park consensus-oriented person, and I think we need more time to explore why people are taking their position. I'm not convinced that the charter approach is the way to go, seeing these issues are too operational for charter. My biggest overall concern is too strong city manager who is essentially not sufficiently accountable. It's a corporate model that is inherently undemocratic. Balance and collaboration are key. One person's professionalism is another's limited accountability. One person's politicized staff is another's responsive to voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Robinson.
As you know, my name is Larry Robinson, and I live at 7504 Holly Avenue, and I've been there for, I think, close to 40 years, at least 35 that I can remember. And on the resident, I'm opposed to the residency requirement because I don't think it adds anything to what people feel or see. My neighbors and I entertained a discussion as to where a bus route should go, right? Because there aren't enough cars, there isn't enough space for the school buses on Holly Avenue and a lane of parked cars and another stream going. I wanted to make it one way. My neighbors didn't agree. They live right next to me. People see things different ways, irrespective of, their proximity to this place or whether they share the tax levy or anything else. That's very abstract. The labor pool issue is not abstract. You look at your population. I mean, sure, you have a zillion people in New York or L.A. or what is it? If I remember right, the statistical abstract used to list cities, large city systems, school systems, 120,000 cities, say. We have nothing compared to what large cities have. I don't think you could justify excluding someone because they're a couple of blocks out where Silver Spring begins, 5 minutes from here. That makes no sense. They might even be out of the county in 5 minutes. So it doesn't add up in any sense to do this. We don't have the pool. The proximities are too low, for other jurisdictions are too small, and there's just no reason, there's no guarantee that it will achieve anything. And it may interfere with getting the best person for the job. Same goes for department heads. I don't see any. I've had no trouble with existing. I've dealt with the rec department recently, and I was treated beautifully. I like the rec department. And I don't see any reason, I don't know where those guys live, and they don't know me, and, I don't know them. So that had nothing to do with it, again. As to advice and consent, the difficult thing is how to get rid of, how to deal with a problem where there's real disagreement about, it may be between the citizen and the policy, or it may be some other thing. I do not like the fact, by the way, that we're confronting an issue that is hidden. In other words, no one is talking about why this is being pushed at this point. I've heard nothing. And the advice and consent thing just has a problem that I do not know if you buy the person personally, right? Or if a group has lobbied for a person, how do you get rid of that person? You're going to have to go, it's going to be all politics after that. I had a situation, I will tell you, yeah, okay, I'll wrap up, promise you. I had a situation where my water supply had been broken, and the question was, where was it, whose property was it? Was it the city's? Was it WSSC's? Or was it mine? And I had to spend a long time. And finally, I got a guy on the county council who used to work here, Mark Elrich, to tap that, talk to him. It wasn't the department head. The question that you have to, you didn't, and Mark didn't hire the guy, or the woman that was involved. But, okay, you have the power to intervene when something is screwed up. You don't need to invest in hiring someone who may, or a bunch of people who may turn out to be fools. And, and then hiding behind them.
Thank you. There's nobody else signed up to testify at the public hearing. I want to make sure there isn't anybody else here who wants to testify. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Thank you all very much. We're going to take a short break, and we will come back and discuss these items.
Whoops.
No, you just have to come in here and say no. Okay, we are back. Thank everybody for providing very helpful comments, and we managed to move through two rather lengthy public hearings in fairly short order, which is very nice. I wanted to give everybody on the council a chance to just make some general comments, and I wanted to take the prerogative of the chair and go first. I've been opposed to the proposed changes since they first came up in July of this year. I remain opposed. I'd like to share my thinking about these changes. First, regarding residency by the city manager. I feel that residency within the corporate boundaries by a city manager is a good thing and should be encouraged. They'll be aware of a broad range of community issues and activities and will be able to participate in activities as they choose. They'll also be closer to work, so they don't have to drive a long way after late city council meetings. However, residency is just one of many criteria that are important in choosing a new city manager. Their professional skills and their understanding of how to employ many different strategies to deal with issues are extremely important. The city of Tacoma Park plays much larger than we actually are. Many people who interact with the city on a number of levels are surprised that we're only about 17,000 or 18,000 strong. We seem much bigger because of the issues that we deal with and the activities that we undertake. Because we're small as cities go, and because of our compact jurisdictional footprint and our large supply of affordable rental housing, the available options for purchase of housing is limited compared to most cities that have residency requirements. The other issues that can affect one's ability to move, given our current national economy, are many. Candidates for the job might already live close by and want to stay where they are. We live in a large metropolitan region where there's lots of mobility. People work in one place and live in another. Candidates might have children in schools where they want to keep them, or they might have elder care or family health issues that can't be disrupted. They might have special needs family members who require their presence. Sure, someone moving here from out of the area will want to look at housing in the city, but they may have constraints imposed by the current state of the real estate market. They may be upside down in their current residence. Their credit rating needs to be approaching 800 to get a loan these days. Any of us who haven't tried to get a mortgage loan would be surprised how tight the standards are. So residency is something that should be encouraged and possibly incentivized. All of the above reasons apply to the imposing residency restrictions on department heads as well, but a 10-mile radius as proposed is a terrible idea. Someone could live anywhere in Arlington or in McLean in Fairfax County or anywhere in the District of Columbia, but if they lived beyond the Beltway in Montgomery County, they couldn't live in downtown Rockville. They could live in Inner Burtonsville, not in Laurel. They could live in Lanham, not Bowie or Mitchellville. A radius is an artificial construct, and tweaking the criteria doesn't fix it. We need to recruit the best professionals. We don't need to tell department heads that they have to live here to understand us and our issues. As for the advice and consent proposal, I think this is a proposal that would change the nature of our city government and not for the better. Currently, the council sets policy and hires and oversees both the city manager and the city attorney. Good, strong city managers need to be held accountable by this council for the hires that they make and for their ability to get the desired results from their professional staff in implementing the goals and policies established by this elected body. Inserting ourselves into the department head hiring decision at the end of the process will not get us the results that we want, but it will politicize the process. Providing policy and goal direction to the city manager at the beginning of the recruitment process, along with continuing two-way communications about city operations, can address this issue. We can do that better within our current structure. We want to keep authority and responsibility together with the city manager. That way, we can hold him or her responsible for their hires, and they won't have the ability to tell us that they aren't responsible for a problem because we created the problem. Just such a situation occurred in Tacoma Park not all that long ago. Our predecessors on the council changed our form of government in the 1980s. They understood firsthand the shortcomings of inserting policymakers into the day-to-day operations of the government. Former council member Paul DeStachio talked about that. Previously, we had what was essentially a commission form of government. Each council member sat on a committee that oversaw a department. When a department head wanted something, they went to that oversight committee. And if it meant going around the city manager, so be it. Our predecessors lived with a system that separates authority and responsibility, and they saw fit to jettison that system. We should honor their wisdom and not change what isn't broken. Other council members? Councilmember Mayle?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to talk to you first about why I introduced these proposals during a council meeting back in July when we first learned that our former city manager was leaving. I want to talk about advice and consent first. If you look around in almost any setting involving a large organization, hiring is treated as an important process, and hiring senior staff is treated most important of all. Why? Because organizations are only as good as their people. And people are often there for a long time, 10 to 25 years being the maximum tenure of some of our current city managers, city department heads. You want to get it right because the decision will be with you for a long time. The origin of this proposal for me on advice and consent is based on the notion that we shouldn't have a single person carry out the hiring of the most important senior staff in our city, that there shouldn't be an ultimate authority without a check and a balance. Let me offer my reasons why we shouldn't leave your elected officials, us, the people, I think, with whom the buck stops, or at least that's what it feels like much of the time, with no ability to influence that final selection. First, government. At the federal level, president's choices are confirmed by the Senate. At the state level, the Maryland governor's appointments, not just to departments but to boards and commissions, must be approved by the Senate. At the county level, the county executive must first take their choices and get the advice by the chief administrative officer, and then they must get the consent of the county council to make department head hires. Yes, a small part of these choices is about politics, making sure that appointees are not wildly out of character with the values and philosophy of that majority. But a big part of it is intended to make sure that qualified people are hired. Second issue, tenure. The organization that represents city and county managers across the country and the world reports that the average tenure of a city manager is 7.4 years. These people move around a lot. And that means that we're sometimes going to have managers on their way out the door or brand new managers to a city when a hiring decision needs to be made. And this is one example that we had recently when we had a police chief hire, who I believe is an excellent police chief choice. But it was a choice that was made by an outgoing city manager on the way to a new job. Third issue for me, people make mistakes. And this is the most important issue for me. It's not an issue about black and white, about somebody making an absolutely horrible choice. It's about when you're making hire decisions, you often have candidates who are really good in 7 aspects, but maybe they have a couple of weaknesses. And as a manager, you constantly have to evaluate, is this the best choice or not? And so to me, it's not about, I don't try to govern based on the what ifs of cronyism and cronyism at the worst extremes. I try to think about these choices that are going to come up all the time for people making hiring decisions. When you're going to have a candidate who maybe has a couple of flaws, and to me, having a council evaluate, and the nature of the proposal that we've made is not that they would evaluate all the applications or even a set of top applications, just that the manager would bring to them this presentation of, this is the candidate I want to pick, these are their strengths, what do you guys think? And to me, that's a great opportunity to get that last little check to make sure that we hire really, really good candidates or great candidates. And we are able to, maybe one time out of 100, say, you know, this choice may not be our best choice. I've heard that this change would be unprecedented. I don't believe that it is unprecedented. College Park, the assistant city manager, city engineer, and city health officer, there's a council advice and consent role in their hire. In Rockville, the council appoints the treasurer. And the International Association of City and County Managers report that more than 60% of cities with a council manager form of government have amended their form of government. We ourselves have a modified manager council form of government because we have an elected mayor. So there's a big space between the form of government the city used to have, the form we now have. And communities can find ways to tweak that as it suits them. I've heard that this will make hiring subject to politics. And for me, at least, this comes down to a fundamental issue of how you view us. We are your neighbors, neighbors who now serve on council, and people who came before us and people who will come after. Our children are born in the same hospitals. Our kids go to the same schools, the same father-daughter dances, the same graduations. We serve as volunteers on the same committees. And we sit up here and read hundreds of pages a week of material about the city. That's our form of volunteerism. I just can't believe that once we get up here, we're no longer decent and trustworthy people. I don't believe that of Bruce or Fred or Seth or Terry or Colleen or Kathy or any of those people. So we're not suddenly going to become people who are prone to cronyism. We're going to keep trying to do that job. We're going to keep being accountable to the person who lives right next door and the person who lives up the street and the people who come to these meetings. Last argument on this issue, I've heard that it won't solve all our problems. I agree. This issue of advice and consent is just a small piece of creating accountability between living with a city manager's choices and firing them. And so this is an opportunity to, in the few circumstances, when we have a department head hire, to say, okay, that was a good choice, yep, move on. But we're not sure this is the greatest choice. It's a chance to have that conversation. It's a structured way to have that conversation. On the residency issue, this will be quicker. Residency is a common practice in both small and large cities. College Park and Greenbelt have it, for example. To give you a sense of just how common it is, let me trace the history that I could find online for our 2 most recent city managers. Rick Finn was the city administrator in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, with a residency requirement. He moved to Sandusky, Ohio, with a residency requirement. Then he moved to Tacoma Park. I'm not sure where he went next. Again, I did this online. But he was the finalist for a job in, Marco Island, Florida. Again, a residency requirement. And then he went to Peekskill, New York, with a residency requirement. All of these cities are between 15,000 and 30,000 people in size. Barb Matthews moved from Gladstone, Missouri, with a residency requirement, to Kirkwood, Missouri, with a residency requirement, to Manchester, which didn't have a residency requirement in the city, but required residency in the state, and it was close to the Illinois border. Came here. I believe the job posting for Tacoma Park had a preference for residency, but as we all know, Barb's husband took a job as city manager in Reston, which had a residency requirement. They live there. And now Barb has moved off to Rockville with a residency requirement. People have before said lots of reasons why I think why residency would benefit us, and I would just say I agree with those. I would like to have a city manager who shares our experiences. That's to me where the basic value comes from. Some issues have been raised about whether it's too expensive to live here, and I'd point out that our city manager left us at a salary level for salary and benefits of about $160,000 compared to the rest of the country. That puts you in the top 10% of salaries in the country. I don't know anyone. I don't know of the people whose wages I know in Tacoma Park. I don't know anyone who makes that much money. On the issue of why we're talking about charter changes, I personally would rather not change the charter. But the advice, and we may hear more from the city attorney tonight, the advice we got from the attorney was that because of some of those changes made in the 80s, we have to change the charter to do this. Keith Berner spoke before about how he would support a residency requirement for people who are moving from far away, but not for people close. My understanding is that to do that, to create a requirement on residency at that level, partial requirement, we would have to create the flexibility for ourselves in the charter to be able to do that. And honestly, I think this is one area of compromise where I would prefer us not to create the residency requirement in charter, but rather to create the ability for us to have a residency requirement. So to amend the charter so that it says the council may, by ordinance, create a residency requirement. That leaves us flexibility, it leaves future councils flexibility. The charter does not need to prescribe what form the residency requirement takes, so we may choose one to do by ordinance, but we could change that, tweak that. It would be more flexible. And I heard a number of people tonight and in written comments speak about that idea of flexibility. And somebody spoke about how let's not have our charter burdened down by lots of detail that might be better left to ordinance. The last 2 points. Why now? It's because we've got a vacant city manager position, and this would be something that would be difficult. I would never have proposed this myself, speaking personally, with Barb Matthews still in the office. I mean, these are two changes to your job description. She was an excellent city manager, and I wouldn't have addressed this then. But now that we have a vacancy, it's the perfect time to do it. And if you were in Ward 2, you would have gotten 7 weekly updates from me about this issue since July. Home video I made about it. Apologize to Ward 2 members for that. And Facebook and website posts and tweets throughout this whole process. So at least in Ward 2, at least anybody who gets any of those communications from me, it's an issue that's been going on for a while. Does this have to slow down the hiring process? And we heard from some of the members of the city manager selection task force tonight, which is wonderful that they were here. My understanding is no, that the delay so far has come from the time we've taken to set up the task force and some of the early process, although there may have been a little bit of a delay. And my understanding is that tomorrow night, the firm that we've hired to help with the search process, they're meeting with the task force, and that they have a couple of suggestions on how we could actually put out a position description that encompasses the possibility of making these changes in the near future without sort of prescribing which way the decision is made. So it's essentially bringing it to the attention of candidates. And then my last point. I don't think, and this came about through lots of the conversation on listserv. I don't think myself or any of my colleagues have frozen people out of the process, have been inflexible in discussion, but rather what we've been trying to do is listen to people, but not to negotiate one-on-one with single constituents or 1 or 2 people or small groups at a time. We've tried to, I think, hold off the negotiations to tonight, to right now, to talking with our council members, and to have that debate fully in public, in front of the television, it's with as many of you are left here as are currently in the room, and to do it that way. So it's not that, for me at least, it's not that there was inflexibility beforehand. We wanted to get to this point. We wanted to get to an official proposal, and we wanted to be able to have this debate with all the wonderful feedback we've gotten so far. I've identified at least one area where we could potentially make some progress in terms of adjusting the proposals we have now, and I'm sure there are many others. There's some other ideas I'd happily propose, and I'll stop talking now. That's far long enough, and let my colleagues speak. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
I don't have any prepared remarks. for this. But I do know what I think, and several things, and so pardon me if I say and or a few times. This has been probably since my time on the city council, perhaps other than the budget of fiscal year 10 or 2011 has been the hardest, most difficult challenge. I'm really pleased to hear Councilmember Mail's ideas and how his thinking has evolved. I think the thinking of all of us up here has we've been forced to think it through and weigh things and get away from our very first knee-jerk reactions to this. And so my primary concern at this point is that we not have anything to do with the city's charter. The further away we can get from having to do that, the more flexible and the more efficient and the quicker we can be. And I'm pleased to know that Tim is contemplating, not necessarily deciding, but open to the possibility that we can accomplish some of what needs to be accomplished without fooling around with the charter. For the reasons that a number of speakers said tonight. I think on the residency requirement, I've said this before and I say this again, I prefer certainly for the department heads that we give the city manager, whoever he or she may be, the power to offer incentives to people who would be competing for a city department head position to move into the city. But I wouldn't want us to sacrifice getting that certain person that our city manager says is the outstanding candidate. I wouldn't want us to lose that person because we felt that that person couldn't run a Department of Public Works unless they, for example, unless they live in the city of Tacoma Park. Yeah, I think there's certain advantages to having residency, but I see disadvantages as well. And now I'm not going to get into all of that. But one thing I will say about it is that when you live in a small town like Tacoma Park, as special as people like to describe it, it's still a small place. We run into each other every day. And if I'm running one of the important departments in this city, I get to be known. And I'd like my department heads, if I'm on the city council, to be able to know that on weekends they can get away from their jobs. And if you live in the city of Tacoma Park, it's going to be a 24/7 job because there's always going to be somebody saying, "Oh, Daryl, I know it's nice to see you here at the co-op, but it'll only take a second, but I just want you to know that we need to get a street lamp in front of our house. And you know I've been asking for that for the last 4 years, and you haven't done anything about it." You know, and by the way, how are you feeling these days? And that's, so that's just an example of why you might not want to live in the city of Tacoma Park and work here, because you do need to be able to have some space. All professionals do, particularly the ones that work here, because most of them work overtime anyway. And I hate to tell you, they put in time on weekends as well, believe it or not. God bless them. With regard to the advise and consent, I've said this and I'll say it again, that I do think that the city council should and can be more involved in the hiring of the important hires in the city government. But I think that it doesn't and it shouldn't be only at the end, because by that time we can have very, very minimal leverage, and we can exercise that leverage at great potential cost. So what I would prefer is that the city council be involved with the city manager right from the get-go. When it becomes announced that we're going to have to replace, so-and-so of such and such a department is leaving, we've got to go out and find a new department head, or a new clerk for a city clerk, or whatever the position might be, so we can then bring our influence to bear then, at the very beginning. Because, if you've ever done any sailing or, running a watercraft across the Chesapeake Bay, you know that a couple points off the compass at the beginning can send you, 10 miles off your destination if you're just going by dead reckoning. So you want to make sure at the beginning you've got your compass set absolutely precisely as you can get it. And you want to keep monitoring that compass as you go across the bay against the winds and the tides to make sure you're heading. So why wait till the end and say, oh, we missed our mark by about 4 or 5 miles. So now we got to go back and do all this work to get back and beat ourselves upwind. Let's just, keep involved right along the way as we sail. And we work closely with the city manager so that he or she understands what we want and that we're serious about it. And if it looks like there's going to be a challenge in finding the kind of person that we think we want to have, then let's have that conversation before we get down to the last 2 candidates. Because I'm afraid that the candidates, that somebody said here, one of our speakers pointed out something, is that if there's a split vote on who gets hired for the city, there's going to be that same split vote when it comes time to can that person because they turned out not to be very good. And then, we don't want that. So I want us to stay involved. I think we can do that administratively. I don't know that we need new laws on the books to do it, but I'm certainly willing to support an ordinance that would make sure that any city managers henceforth understand that the city council expects to have a role in knowing and influencing the selection process. But let's keep it in the hands of the city manager so that everybody understands where that there's only one captain on the ship. There isn't 1.5 captains on the ship. And so there's one person at the helm, and we all know that if you don't, run that ship correctly, there's one guy to blame, and there isn't a whole crew to get mad at. So I'll quit with the stupid analogies at this point and just say I'm really open to looking at ways that we can achieve what the things that Tim has brought forward here. I mean, the information we got today and the stacks and stacks of emails that have been generated, and we've got all of them here. And Seth has compiled them in an Excel spreadsheet that's I don't know how many pages long. It's been very illuminating. It's been healthy and appreciated, and our work isn't done. And I'm really open to looking at how we can achieve, work on this together. Thank you.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. First, I want to thank everyone who was here tonight for expressing your very passionate thoughts and opinions. It was interesting, and I was expecting something much different than occurred, and I really appreciate listening to everyone. I also want to thank the council and the mayor for our ability to discuss this rather controversial issue in a pretty civil. So far, everyone is not maimed. Everyone is still all in one piece. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate Councilmember Mayo's bravery and tenacity for staying with it and for actually making the presentation, because it did come at the right time. There isn't a sitting city manager, and this would be the time to bring this up. I've actually read everyone's comments over the last several months since the residency advise and consent issues were first brought up during July of 2012. There have been overwhelming and sometimes confusing responses to these issues. I only wish the residents were this engaged and as passionate when we talk about emergency preparedness. I get like blank faces when we talk about that. But based on my reading and listening, I believe there's been a little bit of misinformation about both issues. I want to remind everyone that this is a process that we're going through, and this is just a first reading. And even as we're sitting here tonight, there's a compromise, a possibility of not a charter change that gives us the ability to change or to write an ordinance to give us, for future councils the opportunity to more easily change the ordinance. It is a process, and I've always believed in trusting the process, and I'm involved in this grassroots roar, and I'm going to trust that all will be well. I'm sure that all of this will produce a great deal more discussion and hopefully some clarity about proper information about residency and advise and consent issues. I support residency of the city manager with the ability of the city council to grant a waiver for cause. I know there's some people who say we either have it or we don't. There shouldn't be any shades of gray. I'm kind of like, I like a little shade of gray in my life. I'm surprised at all the pushback about this issue and the continued speaking of making the pool of applicants smaller. A possible salary of over $150,000, and that I'm quoting from the Gazette, 2012. I think it was July 2012. In this economy, I mean, it got my attention. If I wasn't my age right now and I had a master's degree in public administration, I'd be applying for this job for sure. Most city managers know they will need to establish a residency in the city that they're going to manage. This doesn't come as a surprise. I'm proud to call Tacoma Park my home. I'm proud of its uniqueness and its diversity. I'm proud of all the people that live here, every single one of them, no matter what they do, because there's a whole bunch of wonderful human beings live right inside, and I don't think it's that small. It seems pretty big to me. I believe that living here or even close by gives one a real feeling of community and heart. And I believe that this is what the city is all about. I'm not as supportive of the department head residency issue. I would like for anyone who is newly hired as a department head to know that we would like to have them live within the city limit, within the city, but I don't think that should be required. I'm hoping and I'm sure that we can reach a compromise here because I'm back at trusting the process. I also support the advise and consent issue. I've never seen it, and I know I don't have the rose-colored glasses on now, but I often look at life through them. I don't see it as a political power that's been stated in so many of the emails, but about just what's knowing about who and what the city manager is hiring. Everyone's only pointed out the veto portion of advise and consent. There's also the yes portion, and there's as much opportunity for that as there is for veto. I don't even go to a veto because, again, I'm at trust the process. I see it as a really simple check and balance, city council and the city manager. I'm also looking for some compromise here. I'm a compromisey kind of a person. I appreciate and applaud all of you for weighing in on these issues. There's a bit more to go as, remember, this is a process and a first reading, and also perhaps a moment to agree to disagree in a very supportive and civil manner. This has been a unique and interesting experience for me, and I actually really appreciate it, and I thank everybody who's been involved. Thank you, Mayor. I'm done.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to hear from a variety of residents who came out to speak tonight. It was something around 24. As Councilmember Schultz mentioned, I've been tallying opinions that have been expressed via email to the city clerk prior to today's meeting and for today's meeting. Also, opinions that have been posted to city email lists that I'm a member of, and I've come up with over 100 opinions, just a little bit over 100, and they're overwhelmingly against both city manager residency and advice and consent. And those opinions have informed me. I've just been very impressed by how informed the residents are. I have not seen any evidence of any significant misunderstanding about what's on the table before us, except for one point that I'll get to in just a moment. I've been very impressed by the knowledge that the residents have brought to the debate here, how well informed they are. So I think that the opposition that has been expressed overwhelmingly against charter changes has been well informed, is my impression. So one bit of perhaps, I won't call it misinformation, but rather on lack of clarity here, I want to address a question, confirmation to the city attorney. Ms. Silber, you wrote in electronic mail on October 11th addressed to the council members in response to a question I posed to you, and I will quote, "You are correct that I believe that the council is free to establish a residency requirement for the current city manager search without a charter or code amendment, although the practice of Maryland municipalities seems to be enacting this principle in their municipal charters." Later on you write, "Technically, the council, in its executive role, has the authority to include the residency requirement in the criteria for the current city manager search." Will you please confirm that a charter or code change is not needed for the council to include a residency requirement in the current city manager search and selection criteria?
Thank you, Councilmember Grimes. I do believe that there is certainly an argument to be made that it is not necessary to do it by charter or code amendment if you're only doing it for one time only, and you're doing it more as a sort of administrative piece as part of this particular search. What I also cautioned, though, was that there is a very widespread practice in Maryland municipalities to do it by charter amendment, and that, of course, is assuming it's going to be a structural, long-term change to the city's government. And I also am concerned that when there's so much community involvement and concern and, you know, so much discussion in the community, that to do it just administratively might send a message that
Messages are political questions, not legal ones. I was asking you a legal question, so if you don't mind, let me take the floor back.
you're welcome to take the floor back, but we probably disagree about what legal advice consists of.
If you want to continue, because you're offering legal advice, please do. I'm sorry.
Well, I think I'd finished.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, all right. So my concern is the current city manager search. I'm actually not one to bind the hands of future council members, and I actually respect the precedents that were set in creating our current form of government regarding the city manager's powers, advice and consent, and all of that kind of stuff, as former council member Paul D'Eustachio referred to tonight. And I think that, as other speakers mentioned, making a charter change is a serious thing, and so I would be very reluctant to do it. I will add one part that really hasn't been mentioned tonight, which is someone did use the word consensus. I value consensus very highly. What I see here, at least before tonight, I don't know how two of the council members who have not spoken yet will what they will say when it's their turn to speak. But what I've seen is a 4-3 split in the council, and that 4-3 split is contrary to public opinion. We don't have consensus. We also don't have an emergency situation. Public safety is not threatened here. The city is not in a huge financial crisis that is forcing us to take any kind of action. Lacking consensus, I personally would be very reluctant to make a fundamental change in the city charter. So I favor making a preference for city manager residency. I favor creating inducements or incentives for department head residency here without a hard requirement, which is more difficult to enforce and more difficult to justify. I don't see a justification for a hard residency requirement because I do believe that one would cut into the candidate pool that we have, not just the quantity, but potentially also high quality candidates that we have here. I quoted to various people recently what former City Manager Barb Matthews said on the hiring of Yolanda Brooks to be the City Finance Director, that Ms. Brooks, who is commuting from something like 30 miles away near Baltimore, stood head and shoulders above any other candidate available. And presumably the search would have excluded Ms. Brooks if residency had been a requirement. So I favor handling the residency question administratively, as Ms. Silber said, in the council's executive function for the city manager. I favor the council's creating inducements or incentives for the city manager and for the city manager and the department heads to reside in the city. And then further, I haven't talked about this, I favor Council Member Schultz's compromise proposal for ratification, well, not ratification, but advice without consent. He put forward a proposal that talks about a discussion of the city manager and the council to talk about the qualities of department heads when there are vacancies, not particular candidates, but of the qualities we're looking for in the position. That seems sensible and within the overall framework of how things have worked successfully here in Tacoma Park for quite a few years now. Thank you.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to everyone who sent in your emails, made phone calls, came here tonight to share your opinions about these proposals. I'm one of the what's been called the Gang of Four. I'm not flashing signs to anyone, but yeah, I have to say this is one of the most difficult issues that I've faced since becoming a council member in 1999. And there have been a couple others, and I think it's evident from the responses from the community that this is not a black and white issue, that there are certainly differences of opinion. It addresses the thing that I appreciate Councilmember Mayles bringing these proposals forward, because it addresses specific problems that I've seen in our government through the years, and we have tried to address some of those problems from the council with the current structure that we have right now, and with limited success. And that's why I appreciated Councilmember Mayles bringing these forward. I'll give you an example. We built this community center since I've been on the council, and yet we spent many years trying to convert the building into the vision that the community had when we held all the meetings about what people wanted to see here in the meeting. There was, I felt, a resistance from the administration to actually using the building in the way that the community had envisioned, with having a lot of programs for to fill the rooms, to fill the building with young people after school. And it was torturous sometimes on the council to actually get the administration to be involved with the vision. And I think we're moving in that direction now. But again, I think that the proposals that Mr. Mayles put on the table maybe moves us a little in the direction of having a city manager who shares the vision of the community, and whether they personally agree with everything that's written in a community center design document, that they understand the community better of who they're serving, and willing to work towards that. I give another example, and that is the City Council several years ago approved and funded the purchase of a new bus, which at the time the discussion was all centered around using that bus to bring young people from the outskirts of Tacoma Park or the other side of Tacoma Park, bringing those young people here to the community center to be able to share the great resource that we have here. and yet that's never happened. Another example, we almost a year and a half ago funded a position for sustainability, and that seems to be a vision that hasn't been shared, and it hasn't been filled yet. Now, taken in total, with all of the things that the city manager is responsible for and the city government does, those are certainly not firing offenses, okay? But again, I felt that, and I feel that Councilmember Mayall's proposals maybe move us a little bit in that direction. Let me say that why would we screw around with our form of government? Well, I've told you why, right? I think there's problems that we need to address. And I have had city residents share with me their opinion that the city manager should be an elected position. I've had others share with me that the mayor, it should be more of a strong mayor form of government, with the mayor more involved in the hiring and firing process. And I personally feel that it's far better to kind of tweak what we have now rather than to sit down and try to radically change the form of government, because as many people came here tonight, it seems to be working pretty well. There are some areas for improvement. I felt like this is trying to make those tweaks that's going to make it a little bit better. Timing-wise, and I think Mr. Mayall addressed that quite adequately. This would be it's a difficult discussion now, because there are people involved. It's not just about a form of government or a document called a charter. It's about the people who fill these positions at any point in time. And I certainly have the greatest respect for Barb Matthews and her functioning as a city manager. She does an incredibly professional job. I think that was a key thing we were looking for when we filled the position, when Barb took the position. And I think we were very successful in getting a professional city manager. Again, my concern is, though, it was somewhat at the expense of kind of a community feel or an appreciation of the community. But the timing issue is, it would have been even more awkward to be discussing that with Barb in the position now. And it would have forced me to say, yeah, she's done a great job. But no, those aren't firing offenses. They were kind of minor things. But overall, I think making the changes would better serve the community and better serve the residents of the community. Anyways, I thank Mr. Mayall for bringing this forward. I think that we heard in our emails and our phone calls and our public hearing tonight, I think we heard many good ideas and suggestions, and also some accusations that I don't like, but that's okay. But I think it's a good process, and I think I really appreciate. I mean, that is part of the character that I see of Takoma Park, is that people do come out and share their opinions with us. And I am confident that Councilmember Mayall and the rest of the gang of 4 plus 2 or 3, hopefully, are going to be able to take these ideas and suggestions and come up with something that's even better. So with that said, I'm not going to say where my position is right now, other than I want us to address those problems. And I remain flexible in entering this discussion, and I hope that some of my colleagues who have taken strong positions will also be a little flexible as we move forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to thank all of the residents for their emails, for the phone calls that I've received. I haven't taken any of these positions lightly. Councilmember Mail made a couple proposals to me in July that I have supported. I think that for the short period of time that I've been on the council and what I have seen, that advise and consent would be an excellent proposal to move forward with. I think that the council needs to be more involved rather than less involved, or keep the status quo. I think that there might be some council members that don't want to know things that are going on, day-to-day activity in the city. But I do believe that when your constituents want to know about a new hire, a potential new hire, what is going on, that a council member should not be prohibited or should have to go through the city manager to get that information. And it's up to the city manager whether or not they want to give you that information. I think with advise and consent, it would at least send a signal that the council wants to know more, to be involved more, by starting with the hiring process. Residency. I want to thank Keith Berner for his comments. They have me thinking. Another point before I go on with that, I want to say that I have not responded to every email because I do not believe in legislating on the listserv. I made comments today that went out in my newsletter, and I will make my comments here, and I'll make the initial votes for the first reading. Now, for residency, I support residency, but I am willing to consider Keith Berner's proposals. Once we get an opinion from the city attorney whether or not we have to go with the charter change, I would like to make an amendment to make residency a requirement for someone that moves outside of the region, and we could use a waiver as an option for a local candidate. I just want to once again say thank you to everyone. This has not been easy. I mean, I've only been here for a few months, and we already have such a major issue before us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to address department heads right now. I would say that I'm willing to hear my colleagues' position on that. I'm very open to department heads. Thank you.
Okay, we've all kind of said our general piece. I think what we need to do at this point is consider what we want to do with any potential charter amendments. That's the thing that kind of has the most urgent driver that we, given the time frame that people want to operate on and get this settled. We need to take those up first. Depending on what we want to do with charter amendments, then we can address ordinances. What we have on the agenda for consideration is a first reading resolution amending the charter to establish a residency requirement for the city manager and require council confirmation of the city manager's appointment of the deputy city manager and city department head positions. So we can, I think maybe the way to go with this is to have somebody move that, and then we can discuss if there are amendments or changes, we can do those, and we'll just kind of march through that in that process.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion of this charter amendment resolution. Councilmember Mayo.
Just a point of order or query. Is it acceptable to address the city attorney as we go? Is that
sure?
Back and forth.
That's
okay.
why she's here.
Thank you for being here. On the issue of residency, my preference is to, being consistent with Maryland, with the Maryland approach of doing something in charter, with the goal of establishing, an option for residency that really that endures beyond this one decision. And frankly, I think that is enforceable. I worry that if we just put a requirement in the position description that someone taking the position, they're not violating anything, but they're hired. But anyway, that's a separate issue. But I'd rather we do is something in charter that creates as much flexibility as possible. So, for example, and I can't remember if it was you that drafted it, but to allow the council by ordinance to establish a residency requirement for the city manager. That would be my preference, coupled with an ordinance that would, define, separate from the charter piece, that would define a residency requirement for city manager. My understanding is, just on this, staying the same issue with regard to charter, that we don't have to make any change to charter to deal with the question of department heads. So that's my understanding. That could be done administratively by ordinance. Any issue regarding department heads, I don't know. So for me, that would be the proposal that I would make, and I hope that's seen as something that's at least a step toward compromise. On advice and consent, again, the same position where doing as little as possible in charter would be my preference. But my sense from the past guidance we've gotten from the attorney is that we need to do something, because the charter contains some fairly stringent description of what we can and can't do. The charter contains Section 702, council not to interfere with appointments or removals. So I don't know exactly how we move forward on that proposal. If there's anything sort of less we can do to charter, to establish that ability to have a council role in advising consent on department head choices. And we have a question of which positions it applies to. The one other question or proposal or option I want to throw out is that I noted I looked at a couple of codes and charters, and I thank my stars just for a moment of levity that I don't live in Greenbelt, where it's literally a misdemeanor that's punishable by expulsion from council if you give an implied order to staff. So they take it way further and create a misdemeanor offense for if any of us were to say to the police chief, for example, please to go do this. I'm sure it doesn't come up, but anyway, I read that and I was like, whoa, glad we're not there. But looking at Rockville in their charter has some of the same language we do around the powers of the city manager, but this language, council not to interfere, is actually in charter, in code, not in charter. And so another option I put on the table is if we moved that from, and it's a question for the attorney, if we moved that from charter to code, or just moved it from charter, if that would maintain the powers of the city manager, but give us more flexibility. So I know I put a lot of things on the table, and we could go at them one at a time or not.
And if I can add just one clarifying question. Part of the process that Councilmember Mayle is outlining would put some language in the charter that moves city manager residency to code, but kind of authorizes the code, ordinance to do that. If we were to go that route, would the process be to change the charter and have the charter take effect and then do the accompanying ordinance, or can they go march together, assuming that the charter will become effective?
So one at a time. If I might, I actually was sitting here trying to draft the first idea that Tim asked about. This is not an elegant draft, but just to give you a feel for what it might look like when fixed. It could say something like, the council by ordinance may establish the terms for a residency requirement and/or preference for the city manager and other executives who report directly to the city manager. The council by ordinance may also establish a waiver from any residency requirement. Could be something that simple, basically just making it clear that there's charter authority for it, but putting the details into the ordinance that when you actually write an ordinance, legislate an ordinance, excuse me. The question of whether you could do them at parallel times, I think that would be fine. One could write the ordinance that it's subject to the charter change. It's a little bit like the advice you're getting from the search person, that we can also send out announcements about our search, even though it's still in process. So I think the timing piece should not be a problem.
Okay.
The question of whether the residency requirement for department heads should be in the charter. I actually think the safest provision would be to say something about that in the charter. We had written that into the proposed charter amendment that's in front of you tonight. And the reason for that is I would say it is somewhat gray. Our charter is very clearly one in which the city manager is given very unbridled authority to appoint her direct reports, the department heads and the deputy city manager, although the deputy city manager actually is not in the charter at the time this charter was written. But the concept of full discretion in the city manager not to be shared with the council is very clear. And so it makes sense, I think, to have something in the charter if you're going to sort of put more parameters on the level of discretion that she can have, or she or he can have, forgive me.
Could I just have one more follow-up? Councilmember Schultz had put together, or had originally proposed, which you drafted, some language around the early, excuse me one second while I find the language. The city, so the language on well, I'm not sure which piece of paper it is, but the city manager, before soliciting candidates to fill these positions, shall confer with city council regarding desirable qualifications. I like that language. My question for the attorney is that something we can do in code, or is there any sort of gray area around that issue?
No, actually, I think that one can be done in code. I don't think it has the same level of consent, but more advice that I think is permissible in the code.
So I'll close by just saying I support that language more or less as written now as an addition to code.
I'm sorry, could you read that language again, please?
Yes, sorry, it's the city. We're
Look on
in.
the front, it says what number it is.
We're in number 5. Number 5. The second page, top of the second page, underlined. The city manager, before soliciting candidates to fill these positions, shall confer with the city council regarding desirable qualifications of the person to be hired, and shall provide periodic status reports to the council throughout the hiring process.
Sorry, I'm lost. Where were you?
I'm sorry, number 5.
Of which packet?
Oh, I'm sorry, I think it's agenda item.
Agenda item 5? Okay.
Yeah. And the top of the second white page.
Top of the second white page.
Okay.
Counting the blue page.
Sorry. Councilmember Schultz before talked about the ship going off course 2 degrees, and I think this is great language that's an important part of the process. To me, it would be nice to be able to find a way to do this and complement it with some version of advise and consent at the end of the process, in which case our ships should rarely be off course, and consent should rarely not be consent. I've monopolized things enough, so I'll stop there, but that's a few ideas for people to think about.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm just trying to see where we can agree. First of all, this last one, which was Councilmember Schultz's proposal, I would agree with that. I think that really addresses one of the key issues that I mentioned earlier. And then I would just say, as far as the residency, I'm not going to say what's a charter or what's a resolution, but I would just say that when it comes to the city manager, I want to have that to be a requirement for city manager, not just for now, but on into the future. And I feel far less strongly about the department heads. And you know, it's funny, tonight somebody said that, well, don't tie the hands of future city managers, but yet we have, our city councils, yeah, but yet we have a strong city manager form of government which ties our hands, right? So that's part of the process of what a council does, is decide how we want to tie our own hands.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible that when we put the agenda item number 3 to a vote, can we break out residency for the city manager and residency for the deputy city manager and the other department heads? Or are we voting on that at one time?
You could propose an amendment to remove the department heads and then take it up separately. You would have to be a friendly amendment opposed by the person who moved the, sorry, this isn't my place.
I would encourage, because I was just, as we were sitting here talking, I thought, well, we may be able to simplify what it is we're trying to do. It sounded to me, tell me if I'm wrong, that there was a general feeling that the thing that we were probably least feeling necessary to do was to get at the whole department head residency question. And if we just kind of pull that out of wherever it was intended to go in any of this, that might be a way to kind of simplify the task a bit.
Okay, that's fine.
So if you want to...
I would like to propose an amendment. I would like to have the first reading on agenda item number 3 to be the establishment of residency requirement for the city manager.
And I have a question.
First, I'll take that. I'll give you the option to make your comment a second.
I'll second that,
Okay.
and then
Thank you, sir.
you know. But I wondered if it shouldn't also include the deputy city manager.
Right now, I think it should only focus on the city manager.
Councilmember Mayo.
So just sort of a follow-up on some of the ideas I put out before. If we adopt the approach using the language that Ms. Silber provided, where you're creating the ability in charter to create a residency requirement, would we want to do that? Would you, I guess I'm asking you, Councilmember Smith, would you want to have that charter language available, but simply table the sort of ordinance piece, which would create a residency requirement for the department heads and the deputy and the clerk?
That's correct. I'd table the other piece.
The ordinance piece, but
Right.
establish the
Right.
space in charter?
Yes, in charter, right.
Okay.
Just in case it wants to be changed by a future council.
Help me here for a second. I think that just changed the proposed amendment.
It did.
So,
Well, I was trying to, because we have both charter and
right.
code stuff on the table.
And that's why all this gets confusing.
And so mine was a clarification issue. And I think what we're looking for are the changes that attract additional votes, right? Or additional
Right.
support.
Yes.
So because we're trying to move forward with a greater sense of consensus. So I think that, the issue is, are there some of these changes that others of my colleagues go, okay, I could live with that, or I couldn't live with that. And that's where I think I asked that question, because now you have, Mr. Mayor, you have sort of these two options. You
Right.
have the way you originally thought it was being said, and now you have an additional way.
Right, so I think...
Just because we need more options.
I think if...
Are separate things.
Yeah, if you would care to...
Amend?
Withdraw your amendment.
Okay. I will
And if that's
withdraw
okay with the seconder.
my amendment.
Okay. And now if you'd like to make a new amendment.
I would like to make a new amendment, as Councilmember Mayo has stated, that we would go forward with the charter change, but we would pull out the resolution that would include requiring the city manager, appointment deputy city manager, and the other department heads.
Okay, I'll second that. And I would like to remind my colleagues that Mr. Lovelace is still with us in the audience, and he has a limited oxygen supply, so.
Thank you.
Too bad we don't.
Let me just ask a question of the attorney. I'll roll it over to you. I think what I'm hearing is that what the desire here is to change the charter to roll the establishment of the residency requirement to ordinance, and it's to make it as flexible as possible in the charter to give ability to do residency requirements, it sounds like, for city manager, deputy city manager, department heads, and deal with that in ordinance. Is that what you're proposing?
Right. I'm proposing that in charter, you can do whatever the future council wants.
The charter says you can do it by ordinance.
Right.
And so the charter is inclusive of all of those jobs.
Right. But ordinance.
But then when we get to the ordinance, it'll be just the city manager.
That's correct.
Okay. But so the amendment to agenda item 3, I want to make sure we see exactly.
Section 705 on the third would have to say by order that it would have to mirror the language that's at the top of that page underlined, except that the council may by ordinance establish a requirement applying to city manager residency.
It's the language that you already
It's the
said.
language,
Okay. Say your language again.
The council by ordinance may establish the terms for a residency requirement and/or preference for the city manager and other executives who report directly to the city manager, which we could say instead, if you preferred, department heads and deputy city manager. The council by ordinance may also establish a waiver from any residency requirement.
Okay. And that is the new language in 705.
Or 702.
Or is it 702?
Is it 702 or 705?
I think it's 705.
Says 705, but you're 702 in it.
702 looks right the way it is.
I think it's an amendment, it's a replacement for 705.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what's currently on the table, is that amendment, that language for replacement for 705. Is there further discussion? I want to try and get it into some pieces that we can deal with instead of just everything's going around.
Can you read it one more time?
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, please tell me if you prefer a different language around the executives. I say the council by ordinance may establish the terms for a residency requirement and/or preference for the city manager and other executives who report directly to the city manager. The council by ordinance may also establish a waiver from any residency requirement.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would like to know, should we break out at this time what that waiver should include?
It would be set by ordinance, so no.
I agree with Councilmember Grimes.
This seems, to me, I'm not going to vote for it, but it seems close enough to what's intended for a first reading.
Right, I support that. Because I second it, no, but I support it anyway.
Okay.
Point of order?
Yes.
I think. Are you allowed to amend an amendment?
Sure.
You are, actually.
Okay.
I don't know the rules. Sorry, Mayor.
I think so. I just figured it was cleaner to withdraw the other one and start fresh.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any further discussion on this amendment? All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
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 Aye? How many ayes do we get? Show of hands?
Hands. Okay.
I'm abstaining.
Okay, that was 5 to, all those opposed? 5 to 1 to 1. Okay. Now we have this. We're back to the main resolution amending the charter. Is there other discussion about this? And let me check and see. I see lights for Councilmember Daniels Cohen and Councilmember Smith. Have we gone beyond that?
Those are old, that's an old.
Councilmember Schultz.
Cohen.
I just I'd like to say why I voted no, is that because it seems to me that what we are hearing from all of us here so far tonight, and what we heard by a vast majority of people who spoke tonight and have written to us, that having city residency as a requirement for so-called, for shorthand use, executive staff is not something that's really, that we feel strongly about. And if that's the case, then I prefer to that we just leave that section of the charter change alone and just focus the charter change on this, that the city would have the council would have the authority to set residency requirements for the city manager and leave everybody else out. Because I don't hear any support for the idea of making residency a necessary requirement. I mean, not really strong support. But that's why. I mean, the vote's been taken. I'm just explaining my position, that's all.
Could I just ask a follow-up? Councilmember Schultz, Councilmember Siemens had said he sort of focused on the deputy city manager. Do you think that is an important opportunity for us?
Well, the deputy city manager isn't even in the charter now, actually. No, I think it's just the city manager is the one thing that of anybody who I've heard speak fervently about it is to address the city manager position. Never heard a single solitary soul. Well, I think maybe there was some comments about police chief or Department of Public Works people, but basically most people here weren't concerned about where our city department heads and the deputy city manager live. Just haven't heard it.
And I'll just say I voted for it because I was looking for the way to do something to the charter now that will make it so that nobody has to go back there to do something else. And I will fervently vote against residency requirements for anybody except the city manager when we get to the ordinance. Councilmember Grimes.
I want to state that I recognize the difference between a charter change that enables something to happen and actually making that happen, and I appreciate that difference. I am going to vote against this because I don't see that a charter change is in order, given the process that we've followed to arrive at this moment, and given the voices that I've heard from the public. So in any case, I did want to state that I recognize the difference between a charter change, again, that enables something to happen and actually doing that thing.
Okay. So are we at back to the charter amendment resolution as amended? Any further comments? Councilmember Mayo.
I just wanted to add a comment related to your comment, Mayor, that I would probably at this point vote against an ordinance establishing residency for city executives as well.
Cool.
But like some of the language that Councilmember Schultz drafted around incentives.
May I ask, could I maybe restate that to see, you would not vote against it, you would not have it raised, since you're the person, I guess, who proposed it in the first place? Or is it already on the table and, well, it hasn't been moved yet?
It's not on the table.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry,
It
which
doesn't
piece-
matter.
which
It's-
piece is this?
This is parliamentary noodling. Just forget it.
Okay. So now we have the charter amendment resolution as amended. Is there any further discussion on this?
Or do we need to get down into the words?
Mayor, Ms. Silver.
Mayor?
Rich, do you want
Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, just a question. I'm not clear if there's an intent to include 701A.
That's what I'm just looking at.
Which is the advise and consent provision that, I'm not sure what the will of the body is, whether that should be part of this resolution or not.
Okay, so that's moving over to the other issue then, the
Right,
advice
but
and consent.
it's in this charter amendment resolution. All of the pieces are in here.
Right.
Yep.
So let's go with that as next.
Okay. Who would like to speak to it?
I'm still trying to find it.
I mean, sorry, my light's on, I'll turn it off. I will speak to it in saying that if there are other proposals on how we could clearly create an opportunity for ourselves in charter, so just so it's clear, I guess, that's what I'm seeking, because my understanding is we need to do something like this in charter. So if there are other ways to do something like this in charter that people feel it gives us the check and balance near the end, at some point, some sort of participation in the process, but does it in a different way, I'm open-minded to that. And I proposed one other alternative, which was, my other alternative was the elimination of, and maybe this is seen as worse, I don't know, by council members, but the elimination of Section 702 from charter, and we're putting an amended version of it in code. So that's an alternative. I'm not saying it's the preferred alternative of somebody else, but and I picked that up, as I said, by looking at the way Rockville did it, or does it. Rockville's charter does not include that. It includes the language around city manager powers. Almost this verbatim language, and I can read it. I've got it in my pile here somewhere. Almost this verbatim language from Section 702 is actually in code instead. So that would be a different approach. It would maybe, and the attorney may have a different opinion, but maybe that would create the opportunity for us to create create a version of advice and consent, but do it again in code and not in charter. And I don't know if we'd be giving, if some people would view us giving up too much by doing that, by taking this out of charter. I don't know. Thank you.
I see a different way of handling it, perhaps. Tell me if I'm crossing over out of my lawyer role, because I'm sensitive to that. It seems to me that maybe one simply needs a proviso in Section 702 that it would not be interference by the council to do the kinds of things that, for example, you, Mr. Mail, liked about Fred's ordinance. Getting input at the beginning and, having the qualifications, that there has to be consultation with you, that could be stated as not interference, that the interference is simply the actual selection of people, the individual, that there shouldn't be interference with that, but that you should have a role in consultation as to what kind of person you're looking for, what kind of qualities, what kind of direction. So something like that could be written.
Can we make it stronger in that the council shall, its duty shall to have a role?
Yes, you could, absolutely.
In other words, it's not something that's a proviso that we can't, we're saying you can't do this. I'd rather say, okay, but we also, it should be explained that the council has to have a role. We cannot not do that.
Yes, I think that could be drafted and could be very effective.
So that no city manager in the future could sort of, bob and weave on that one, we would say, well, look, we're required to whether you like the way I get, brush my hair or something, makes no difference. This is our duty to do this.
And it's actually two shalls, right? The city manager shall.
The council shall
and the council shall. Yeah.
And so it would leave the language that's in here about shall not interfere, but it says
But it makes
the,
clear
the, the other, so there's a whole bunch, there's the existing shalls and added shalls. Yes.
I heard Councilmember Mayo some minutes ago state an interest in moving the language from Section B on the top of the second side in number 5 packet item, which says before the city manager, before soliciting candidates to fill positions, shall confer. I think I heard you say that you wanted to move that into a place where it would go into charter.
Right.
No, I misunderstood.
I asked whether it needed to be, whether in order to make that language, to make it work, whether the city attorney believed that had to be in charter, and she indicated that it did not. So I actually support this language as
in the ordinance.
In the ordinance. So, for example,
it seems plenty strong.
And the one addition that I think, because the way I'm understanding accept that language you just proposed for the charter, the one addition I would make to the language from item 5 that Councilmember Schultz had proposed was I would add a shall around the advice part of advice and consent at the end as well. So this currently is drafted as before soliciting candidates shall confer, shall provide periodic status updates, and shall seek the council's advice on final selection, or seek the council's advice after having identified the final, or before making, something. So
this goes beyond what has been discussed to date, I believe. Where what has been discussed to date is effectively the language that Councilmember Schultz has before the hiring process, together with the language that's on the bottom of page 1 of the white sheet on number 3, that there would be the consent. But the consent, I believe we talked about up until this moment, would be just the city manager hands the council a resume, maybe presents the candidate and says, this is the person I'm about to hire. Sounds like you're proposing that the city manager would say, okay, this is my short list, who do you like? No.
So let me clarify that. What I'm saying is the city manager says, this is my candidate. What we have written right now in this language is, this is my candidate, and now I need you to affirmatively vote, for my candidate. What I'm proposing is not that we affirmatively vote, but rather that the manager presents their top candidate, and I don't know how to draft this, but they seek our input on that candidate at the very end. So
and that's after there's been the other pieces
right.
at the beginning and as going through.
Right.
So it's affirmative shalls, advice at various parts in the process.
Advice, and it takes away the vote. It takes away the consent. So the timing.
But there's advice before.
But there's advice before the choice is made.
It creates a marriage from beginning to end.
Right.
That the process involves us. This is the city manager is doing all the work, and they're consulting, seeking advice, and they're listening.
Acting almost like routine.
No, I wouldn't go that far.
I agree. And just the one thing I would add, which hasn't been part of the public record so far, is that I assume that last stage will be done in closed session because it refers to a personnel file for a candidate who has not yet been offered a position, whose current employer may not know they're seeking other employment, and for whom, if the council and the manager sort of decided together they weren't going to make an offer, you wouldn't want to make that public. So I don't think that needs to, I would assume that the guidance we would get upon implementation would be that this would be done in closed session. I don't think we need to specify that here, but I want to just clarify it for the record. The one thing in the back of my mind is this, someone said earlier tonight, how much work are you going to do? Roger Schlegel said this, you don't want to take up all your time in this stuff, and I'm conscious of that. So I'm making this proposal now as sort of a good faith effort to give us more flexibility, to make something that maybe gets more support. But I'm also conscious that we've created more work. So I just want to put that out.
I was just going to add that the requirement that personnel decisions be made in closed session and confidentially is in state law.
Okay. And back on this point, that this really is, I guess, a charter change to give this, that the city manager shall advise the council. Because it's not clear in the charter that there is that flexibility. I mean, that's a question. I'm certainly not trying to take your job.
No, of course, I appreciate it. I do think it's been argued by some that the interference clause that currently exists would prohibit even this level of
Right.
consultation. So one way to deal with that lack of clarity would be to put it right into this section.
And I think that's I think it's a good proposal. I think it makes it clear here that there's non-interference, but there are these things that should take place. And I kind of think of it as advice at the beginning, advice in the middle, advice at the end. And I can support that.
So can I.
Except, just one clarification, it wouldn't be so much advice at the end. The way we have it phrased right now is the manager is just keeping us updated.
Mhm.
It's not. It's a one-way street at that point, which is fine by me.
Well, but you're still giving your opinion,
Yeah.
which is advice.
Sure.
All right.
It might be bad advice.
Are we
but it's
using,
still-
are we using these buttons or not, sir?
Oh,
I
Councilmember Daniels.
pushed mine a long time ago.
Thank you, Mayor. So at this point, this is just a point of clarification for my, at almost 11:10 brain. We're talking about advice through the process and eliminating any consent from the council. Okay, all right. And that would be what we would call a compromise, right?
Yes.
Is that something you can live with?
Who is the one who keeps talking about compromise?
You going to go against this now?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Even better than anything else. Advice is good.
Would you like to give us some advice?
Oh, I could give you a whole lot of advice, but I don't want to do it with the microphone here.
Okay. So I think.
Jay, I want to hear this. We'll be back in a minute. Take a break.
Okay, so I think we have, does the city attorney have a clear sense of the various language changes that are necessary in this charter amendment for first reading? Have we covered everything? I think we have. I guess my only question is going back to section 702, the language that is in caps and underlined at the top of page 3 in agenda item number 3, is that something that we're adding, or is that something we're removing because it's been dealt with in 705?
My sense is we're deleting that bold language on the top of page 3. We're replacing the language on 705 with the different residency language. And then the part that I haven't finished trying to draft yet, but I'm in the middle of trying to draft, is this 701. Let's see.
Those changes that we just talked about,
Yeah.
about the three-stage advice,
Yes.
that puts that there with the shall not, but shall.
Yes, my sense is we take Councilmember Schultz's language from the ordinance and add to it not only the prior consultation, but the middle and end consultation.
Okay. I think we have something that is ready to ask for public comment on this, resolution. Yes.
Would you be willing to consider taking a short break so that you actually have the final language in front of you before?
What I was going to do was see if there was any public comment, which we can do while the language is still being worked on.
Okay.
And that's
And then we'll take.
that's our break. Is see if there's any public comment.
Well,
And if there isn't, we'll take a short break.
The assumption is the public understands what.
right.
Well, if you want to read it.
The public has heard the sausage being made here.
So have I, and I'm not 100% sure where you are.
Why don't we
so-
take a
Take a
break
break.
now and
Okay.
just take public comment after a break, after the
That's
attorney
fine.
has a chance
Good, yeah.
to draft
We
that.
certainly want
I
our
was
city
just,
clerk.
I was just trying to make sure somebody doesn't run out of oxygen.
And just,
Yeah, I know.
and just to clarify, and the city attorney doesn't need to listen to me, is that, so we've got these sort of 3 changes left, well, 1 removal and 2 amendments to current language in the charter. And then with code, we've indicated an interest in creating that residency requirement for the city manager. I haven't heard any strong enthusiasm for creating the code language for residency requirement for executive staff.
Right.
We've still got on the table the issue of whether we wanted to create any sort of incentives for the executive staff. That's sort of come up, but we haven't moved in any direction. And then the last issue we really haven't gotten to is whether on the language now being drafted, we need anything further in code, and we may not. Is that a fair summary of?
Yes, and we could address the code languages next week.
Right.
Okay.
But I just wanted to summarize.
So-
To the extent that we made some progress, I wanted to summarize some of the stuff that I think
Right.
we
I
made some
think
progress
that's where we are, and I think we take a short break. We'll have the language that we need for the charter amendment this evening. We know where we think we're headed on the code pieces. We can take that up next week, and we can,
Check our oxygen.
yes.
Yeah, go check
So
your
we'll take a
oxygen.
short break.
Aye. We're almost back.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. We pumped some new life into him.
Are we ready? So does the city attorney want to just walk us through the language?
Sure. Thank you. It's actually become much more simplified. There would be no amendment to Section 701. The council would be making amendments to Section 702 and 705. 702, first the title would be changed. In addition to saying the council not to interfere with appointments or removals, would say the city manager shall consult with the council. The specific consultation language would be the current charter, which basically says neither the council nor any of its members shall direct or request the appointments of any person. And then where we had said a different exception to that, the new exception would read, except that the city manager, before soliciting candidates to fill these positions, shall confer with the city council regarding desirable qualifications of the person to be hired, and shall consult with the council throughout the hiring process. And then in Section 705, there would be an amendment that would replace the one that was in the packet, and instead the new 705 would say, the council by ordinance may establish the terms for a residency requirement and/or preference for the city manager and other executives who report directly to the city manager. The council by ordinance may also establish a waiver from any residency requirement. And there would be no other changes to the charter, this charter provisions.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
Would you like to move these amendments?
Yes, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further council discussion on this resolution as amended? Councilmember Mayo.
So two suggestions. One is more minor. The title of Section 702, I propose that it could be simplified to say council involvement in or with appointments or removals, the end, as opposed to not to interfere, semicolon, shall consult. That's a more minor issue. The other is that I'd rather, Councilmember Siemens before described this as 3 steps, consult, consult, consult. And to me, I see sort of 2 here. So all the language at the beginning, shall confer with the city council regarding desirable qualifications of the person to be hired. I'd rather go back to the language that Councilmember Schultz had proposed, or maybe it's a comma next, shall provide periodic status updates to the council throughout the hiring process, and shall, so that second one is shall provide updates, and the third one is shall consult with the council regarding the final candidate, or shall consult with the council, when the manager has identified a candidate, or something like that. Just because to me this language, consult with the council throughout the hiring process. I mean, what I really want, what I'm trying to get at is, I want to make it clear that the manager is supposed to talk to the council about the candidate they've selected at the end. And
Not that we can say no, but so that we can just.
Exactly.
Give
So
our
it's not in the abstract. It really is at the end. There's at least one moment at the end where it's about the actual person. I'm planning to make an offer to this candidate. This is why I'd make an offer. The council can say, we're going through the consult phase at the end. That looks like a really good choice. But there's no voting. But I want to make it clear that happens at the end, and not leave it, I believe, a little too vague the way it is now. Just for the city attorney's perspective, have I described it in a way that could potentially be drafted?
Absolutely, yes.
Do we need that language?
I'll try to say what I think Councilmember Neal said. Except that the city manager, before soliciting candidates to fill these positions, shall confer with the city council regarding desirable qualifications of the person to be hired, and shall provide updates to the council throughout the hiring process, and shall consult with the council prior to appointment.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
Does the seconder support that?
I don't know, does he?
He does.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a substitute amendment. So we now have the language. Any further comments on the resolution as amended?
Sorry, there's just one more. I brought up the title, right? The title change.
the title, right.
Put out there. So whether the second also. The title was council. What I proposed was council involvement in appointments or removals.
And I do support that change.
Everybody fine with that? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I would just like to thank my colleagues for all of the hard work on this and the time and thought put in, and I am happy to see us meet in the middle. And I think that what we end up with addresses the problems as I had in my mind, and I'm glad that this is that making sausage seems to work. Thank you.
Okay. I want to make sure we have a chance to get any public comments, since some folks are still here after 11:30.
Mark Lanza, 7215 Cedar Avenue, member of the City Manager Selection Committee. I'm happy to see that the consent part of the advise and consent is no longer going to be described as a council vote on appointments. I think the language that remains in the charter starting with neither council nor members shall director request the appointment is very important to consider. I would also not change the title because I think the first clause is the most important one. So that would be just a suggestion on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Yes.
If I can just check on something, I guess I'm going back to the title. Because there's not a council involvement in the removals, would it work to say something like council role in appointments or removals?
Yeah.
So, and then it describes it further in the paragraph?
Uh-huh. Even better. Of course, I'm not the seconder, so.
I second that.
I want to say that was my concern also, but I was thinking that was for second reading, but it's good you resolved it tonight.
Now, what is this, to change it from involvement?
The title.
To roll.
Council role in appointments and removals or removals.
Just for people in the community who are watching, that there's a very big difference in the involvement in the appointment process compared to being involved at the other end in the removal. And there's nothing in our charter currently that would allow the council to have any role in the removal process.
Although we would like that sometime. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
There goes the compromise.
You go down there and huddle with Jared. Okay, so we have the charter amendment resolution as amended. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Stay.
Okay. That carries. Just some clarification for what we're going to add to next week's agenda. We're going to add the consideration of ordinances amending the code, and we've talked about we're going to add residency for city manager, not for the rest. Was there something else that we need to do with that?
Hold on to the hiring incentives, or the residency incentives, or not?
Incentives for
executive staff.
Preferences and incentives, which was my language that I was thinking of.
Do we have a list of what those incentives would?
Preferences and incentives is what I said.
And from some things that we heard this evening, I think incentives are a lot easier and clearer. Preferences can get you in trouble.
And the other thing would be second reading of the charter, which perhaps, if you were interested, we could make a little bit cleaner than this first reading, not that it's not perfect already.
I would think it was perfect.
Right.
We just did it. didn't we?
So next week we'll be discussing ordinances changing the code on the city manager residency and any discussion of incentives / preferences. And
One final question for the city attorney.
yes,
It's my understanding that relating to the language we just put together, that's in section 702, that we would not need to do anything additional in code, in ordinance. So the language that you just wrote, delete, except that the city manager.
Correct.
That stands on its own.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understood what you were asking.
I was just making sure that with regard to this section 702 change, we just agreed on the three sort of advise, that there's nothing additional that needed to be explained in a subsequent code amendment or an ordinance.
Right.
It sounds like, and the answer from the attorney at least was no.
Okay.
okay. So we've completed what we need to complete this evening, and we're adjourned.
Love it, love it, love it. I was just going to say, so moved.